Montana, January 20th, 2021. Mike, would you make the roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. We just heard from Brett DeBrucker, Chair. Nina Bacchus.
Here.
Lila Taylor.
Here.
Wendy Palmer.
Here.
Gil Stockton. That's a no. Ed Waldner. Okay, that's a no. Sue Brown. And that's a no. So we do have four members present.
Okay. What about members of the public and the staff online? Do we need to go through everybody that's here, Mike?
Yes, let's do that so everybody's aware. So this is Mike Hankett, Executive Officer for the Board of Livestock. And I'll just call out staff so that we don't have to go through them individually that I see on. So Dan Olson from IT is on helping me run the meeting. Dr. Marty Zalewski, Evan Waters, George Edwards. We have Chad Lee, Brian Simonson, Ethan Wilfor, and Gary Hamel. Those are all the members of the Department of Livestock staff that are on, and Donna Wilhelm is on as well. Thank you, Nina. So that's the members of staff. So I'll go through guests here real quick. I see a Cheryl, but I actually think that's Jean Curry. Okay, then here we have Lori Hanuska Brown, Nicole Roth from Farm Bureau, Rachel Cohn from Farm Bureau. I see Alan Redfield, so is on. And that's all of the outside guests. If I did not identify you, because there are some phone numbers here I don't recognize. If I did not identify you, would you please jump on, unmute yourself, and identify yourself at this time?
Hey, Mike, it's Greg Judah.
Oh, so sorry, Dr. Judah. Dr. Judah's on. Anyone else?
Okay, well, Mike, thanks for doing that. Members of the staff and the public, welcome aboard. With that, Board of Livestock, we're going to transition right into the consent items. Is there any discussion about the consent items, or is everything in there okay to proceed with?
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of questions, and I don't know if you want them asked here or later.
Well, we need to know if we need to pull some of this out, or if everything in the consent item agenda is okay to pass and move forward with.
Okay, would you please pull Livestock Loss Board and Milk and Egg Bureau?
So all of the Livestock Loss Board and all of the Milk and Egg Bureau you want pulled out?
Well, in the Livestock Loss Board specifically, their legislative bills and all of the Egg and Milk Bureau.
Okay, so Nina would like the legislative bills for the Livestock Loss Board pulled out of the consent agenda, Mike, and all of the Milk and Egg Bureau pulled out. How about the rest of it and the rest of the board members? Is everything else satisfactory?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Lila. I'd move approval of the other, unless somebody else has something to say, the minutes, both sets of minutes and the rest of the consent items.
Okay, thank you, Lila. We've got a motion on the floor to accept the rest of the consent item agenda. Is there a second?
This is Wendy. I second that.
Thank you, Wendy. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign? Okay, thank you. Mike, if you could make sure that we take the two things that Nina requested, make sure we don't forget them, if you can help me, please.
Mr. Chair, I would suggest let's just go ahead and do them right now.
Is that okay? All right, then let's talk about the Livestock Loss Board legislative bills for the 2021 session. Nina, what's your question?
My question is on their bill, Senate Bill 27, where they're talking about their multiplier rate by region. And I question how well it would be accepted by producers if they get a multiplier only by their region and one region gets a multiplier of 1.5, excuse me, and one region gets a multiplier of 3.5. And I wonder if it would be better if the multiplier was straight across the board, whatever it was. And I realize this is already in bill, but I think that could be a serious concern to some producers.
George Edwards, I believe you're on the line, I heard. Why don't you make a few comments to that?
Hey, Chairman, board members. The reason that that is being done and put in there by regions is that in the Centennial, or not Centennial, but Ruby area of Madison County, it's a lot harder to find carcasses. And so that region may have a higher multiplier than the plains where it's easier to find carcasses. The board discussed this thoroughly, and they would go through an administrative rules process where the ranchers and the general public can come in and talk to the board to help them determine what a multiplier would be for each area. So it's not going to be without public input and thorough thought put into that. The reason that it just says multiplier by regions in the law proposal is that our board could already pay a multiplier. It had other losses as determined by the board in our current laws, but there were some groups that were challenging that, especially when the Grizzly Council was going. And so our board decided that we wanted to have multiplier added to the law so that we wouldn't be challenged later, especially if someone challenged us in court over the way the law is currently written. When this was discussed in the legislative hearings, it was well received. In fact, it passed out of the Senate Ag Committee unanimously. And yesterday in second reading on the Senate floor, it passed 48-1. So I'll stop there and see if I need to add any more to it.
Nina, you got any questions for George?
I just, no, I understand it's already passed out of the Senate Hearing Committee. I do realize also they do not have funding for this. It's a bill without funding at this point. But I just, you know, people are what they are. And if somebody in Alzada only gets 1.5 multiplier on his animal, and someone, say yourself, Brett, gets 3.5, I can see where people would get pretty upset. And I understand. I just think we should be well aware that there may be some controversy. Thank you for letting us look at it.
Okay, thank you, Nina. Anybody else have any comments or questions about this? Okay, I'm not sure what to do about it at this point, Nina, other than see what the legislature does further. So appreciate you bringing it up. Mike, is there anything else on this that we need to cover?
No, Mr. Chair, if we could, and part of the reason why I think we should just try to deal with things as they come up is, as most of you know, we have a little bit of scheduling concern with some things going on with the legislature. So while we have staff here to answer those questions, that's why I figured it might be best to just go ahead and get to them. So
Sounds good.
Milk and Egg Bureau was the next thing.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Mike. So Chad Lee, Milk and Egg Bureau, right? Or what?
This would be Dr. Zalewski.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon me. Dr. Zalewski.
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina, and my
Yep.
question's on this, the impending software update. Do we have a timeline of when that update might be completed?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, this is Marty Zalewski. Yeah, thanks for the question. That is scheduled for next week. So we are very actively, highly active in preparing for that update. And ATC, the vendor for VADS, will be conducting a series of updates next week. The primary focus of that week will be to get the milk and egg lab into the computer system.
Mr. Chair, this is Dan Olson. May I speak for a second?
Yes. Yeah.
So Marty, that actually got bumped out yesterday afternoon. The following weeks will be during the week of February that ATC will be on site. So just to kind of correct you on that one.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, the second question again for Marty. The milk license renewals, how are they going?
So it looks like they're going well by the report as far as the percentage that are completed. But Darcy is on the phone right now, and she's primarily in charge of renewals and addressing those. And I would defer to her to provide you any additional details.
Yes, good morning. This is Darcy Alm with the Program Manager for Milk and Egg Bureau. Mr. Chair, Mrs. Bacchus. Renewals are going very well. I do have a few stragglers, but that's not unusual. Usually we're done by mid-January to end of January. So I've just got a couple producers and a couple milk distributors and jobbers that I'm waiting on. Otherwise, everything's looking good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Nina, anything further there?
Nope, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, everybody else good?
Yep.
Okay, we'll move into old business. Mike, you want to give us an update on the COVID-19 response for the department, please?
Mr. Chair, I think you're looking at an older version of the agenda. The first thing we have on the agenda is some new business that was added concerning the potential for the board to make comment, on USDA Wildlife Services environmental assessment. So we're having environmental assessment out on predator damage and conflict in Montana. Ms. Bacchus raised this to my attention for the potential of whether or not this is something the Board of Livestock would like to do comments on, just like we did on the RFID tag situation a month or two ago. So that's what we have on the agenda right now.
So forgive me, Mike, I'm looking at the booklet that was sent out. Is there an updated agenda since then?
Yes, I apologize. Donna actually took a vacation day, which is unusual for her. And so of course, that means I'm discombobulated when she takes a vacation day. So yes, I added that to the agenda over the weekend.
Okay, are there any other changes I need to know about? Because I haven't seen the latest one then.
No, I think that's it, other than when we start old business, the first thing on the old business agenda is the Bear Paw livestock requested sell day change.
All right. Okay, so the new business, USDA Wildlife Services Environmental Assessment.
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina. I did not print out the entire assessment. It's about 750 pages. But I do have just a brief synopsis, and it says that the EA analyzes the potential environmental impacts of alternatives for wildlife service involvement in predator damage management in Montana. And I don't know what producers in this state would do with environmental impact of alternatives if we didn't have wildlife services. We need them very, very much. And I know there are a lot of people would like us to use all kinds of other things. I know our livestock loss program has a program to come up with some other things for deterring predators, but it comes back to having those operatives out on the ground taking care of our livestock, keeping track of what's going on. And I think it would be a very good idea if the department would consider sending comments in for the EA. Those comments need to be in by February 19th. And so I asked if we could bring this forward for discussion by the board, if they would consider public comments in favor of supporting wildlife service activities in the state of Montana.
Okay. What other discussion have we got on this subject?
Mr. Chairman, this is Lila. Hey, I think we should maybe do it the same way we did the RFID tag comments, get a group to meet, whether by phone or however we did it last time, and bring some kind of a suggestion back to the board if we want to send it through as something from the board. But we don't have grizzlies yet, thank God. But for all of you that do, I can't imagine what it's like, but we do have a gajillion coyotes. And if we did not have wildlife services, we would not be calving very well, I can tell you that, in March and April. So I think we should get a group of our board together. That'd be my suggestion. Do just what we did with the RFID, try to come up with something that's palatable for the majority of the board, I guess.
I think that's a good idea. Any other board members have any comments on this before we do that?
Mr.
Okay,
Chair,
do I have any volunteers who would like to serve on this? I don't know if I'd call it a committee, but this comment committee, I guess I'd call it, for the environmental assessment. We have some volunteers.
I would.
Nina?
And I volunteer.
Anybody else?
This is Wendy. I would be happy to help with that too.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, well, if the two of you guys would work with proper staff in the department to get something put together, that'd be great. Mike, do we need, if it's got to be in by February 19th, I'd assume we're going to hold a meeting around that time, but we'll have to handle this prior to whatever meeting we have, I would imagine, correct?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. To ratify the comments, we always can, do a special meeting, one topic meeting if we have to, or
Okay.
of course, later today, we'll talk about if there's going to be a need for a February meeting, and maybe the timing of that'll work. We'll see.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Lila. I'd be glad to help if you, I always think it helps to have three people on. It's just my own personal
Okay.
deal.
Um,
I should have three people.
Well, you'll have to get on that group there, Lila, and explain how much a cajillion is.
Okay, I can do that. I've been in the livestock industry long enough to do that.
Okay, sounds good.
And will somebody be able to send me that information? Would that be Mike or would that be Nina?
Yeah, we can get it to you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, just so everybody knows, I think I included the link in the weekly update that I sent to the board on Monday. So if you look down in there, there should be a web link if you want to go ahead and get started. That'll take you to the USDA site on that. And while I've got the floor, Mr. Chair, I'll point out that while we've been talking about other things, Ed Waldner is on now, and so is Jill Stockton.
Okay, thank you. So, the new board members, if you could please mute your microphone unless you have something you need to chime in about. Okay, with that, we'll move into old business. And it appears as though we need to discuss the decision on the Bear Paw livestock requested sale day change. We held a hearing about a week ago, was it, Mike? And listened to the all sides, but there's really only one side to it. So rather than take action then, I was in a bit of a hurry. I appreciate everybody's understanding. We need to take some action today on whether or not we want to allow Bear Paw to change their sale day from a Friday to a Monday. Is there any discussion on that?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Nina.
if I recall, you suggested we wait till the meeting in case there were any comments came in from the public. So
That is
I would
very
ask
true.
staff,
Thank
did
you.
any come in?
Mr. Chair, this is Mike. I can report that we've not received any additional written comments or even phone calls here at the department. As I said, there are some phone numbers out there on the Zoom call that I don't always recognize. So we might want to, and there's some organization representation, so we might want to give them an opportunity to make public comment on this
I'm not sure
if
we
we
can.
wish. But I don't know. Well, yeah, that's right. Nina's pointing out to me that, or excuse me, Lila is pointing out to me that I've got Nina on this side, I got Lila on that side. Pointing out to me that we may not be able to take public comment now because the hearing was closed last week.
Mr. Chairman, this is Lila. I'd like to move that we approve the requested change by Bear Paw.
Okay,
Monday sale day.
we have a
I-
motion
I
on the
will
floor. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so we've got a second. Is there further discussion? So I have a little bit of further discussion I want to make sure the board is aware of. Although I'm in favor of this change, and that's how I'll be voting, I don't see an issue with it. We had a request pretty similar to this not that long ago by another livestock auction in the state. Of course, there was some objection to it. One of the reasons, if I remember correctly, why this board rejected that change was because we felt that we had, when we issue a license, we have the ability to, determine that. And I just wondering what kind of discussion there is for the board here as far as potential precedents of not allowing that change and now allowing this change, what kind of discussion there might be on that subject.
This is Wendy. What was the reasoning why the other one was rejected? Just curious.
Mike, I'll let you explain that, please.
Wow, you're making me go back in the recess of my memories. One of the issues we had with the last sell date change was that we did have some objection from another market to the sell date change, which is different than this particular situation. So one of the other markets did raise a concern that the market requesting the sell date change was moving or adding a sale on a day that they have a sale, and they were concerned about buyers being able to be in both places. And so there was some dissent raised last time, whereas there's not been dissent raised so far in this particular case.
Any other comments or discussion about what I brought up?
No, I think, Brett, this is Lila. I think you're right. I look at dissent. And I also look at location, I guess, more than anything, about where these markets are spaced, I guess you'd call it that. I really understood what Bear Paw was saying when they got around to help. Availability on Fridays of having help that they could get to work, and if help at those sale yards or anything like the rest of us, we all understand that. But that was my reasoning to think that probably this was a different, I'm not saying a different request, but a request that made sense. And the fact that none of the other people on either side, I guess, or across the rivers to the south, had any kind of a adverse comment on it.
Okay, thank you, Lila. Anything else? Okay, with that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Any opposed, same sign? Okay, Mike, motion passes.
Brett, can I make a comment right here?
Yes,
That
Lila.
I would like done, and I didn't bring it with me, but and I know Abby is fairly new in the job she does, but when she gave us that chart of what auction marks had at what day, she said she wasn't exactly sure on those alternate days, you know, that they request an extra sale or something. That list was not complete. And I think it's really important. They have to come to us to ask for those extra dates, whether it's in the fall or whatever. And I think it's really important that we know which yards ask for what dates. And I know Abby's new, but I think we need to do a little more research and make sure we know as a board what dates those sales have been approved for, because we may get more and we should know that.
Mr. Chair, may I?
I don't have that piece of paper. she
Yeah.
sent us.
So I think Ms. Taylor brings up a good point. One of the things that we've become aware of over the last few years as we have dealt with market changes of ownership, as you know, we've had a flurry of activity around livestock markets where we went for a long period of time, or so we thought we went a long period of time, with very little change to the operations of the markets, very little change in ownership, very little change in what they're doing, when they're doing it. I think one of the things that the more we have gotten people coming to the board, acting in accordance with what the statutes and rules require the Board of Livestock to do in approving these, to make sure that they're being done in a way that is healthy for the livestock producers across the state. I think we've learned that there have been a lot of subtle changes made over time, going back in our history, that maybe were not done by proper process. And so and I'll admit that's part of our issue, because, you know, we start looking at it and someone says, well, I have a special sale date on this day during July. And you go, well, I don't remember us doing that while I've been here. And as you investigate it, you find out, well, I talked to the staff 12 years ago and they told me it was okay and I did it. And you're like, okay, so part of the problem here is that because of some of the changes we've had with markets, I think we've got a lot of our market owners and our staff and our board much more aware that these types of changes are supposed to come to the board for discussion and approval. And so I think it's highly possible that we do have some things happening that were changes in operation that just never were brought to the board for one reason or another back in history. And so I think that's part of why Abby was a bit confused, because as she has maybe a list of what she thinks is happening, and then when you talk to the markets, or as she went out to visit the markets this past year, being new to the job, you find out they're doing something different than what was on our paper here at the Department of Livestock. And the question is we don't know, you know, they've been happening. I guess you can say that past practice rules. If somebody's been doing that for 12 years and no one has raised an objection, you can probably be okay with it. But the reality is that change, when it was made 12 years ago, should have come to the Board of Livestock, and for whatever reason was not brought to the Board of Livestock. So I do believe we have some of that out there.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Jill. You got to get off mute, please. There you go. Nope. We're not hearing you, Jill.
Let me see. I'm gonna.
How about now, Jill? You're off mute. Can we hear you now? Must be something wrong with his audio, huh, Mike?
Must be. I'm trying to see here.
He's muted, right?
He's unmuted on our system, but he may have some setting on his computer that's causing an issue.
Jill, we'd love to hear what you have to say, but for some reason you're not on mute and yet we cannot hear you. So hopefully you can get that figured out. Holler when you do.
Mr. Chair, I would ask Mr. Stockton if he would look to the bottom left of his screen. He may see a little audio settings button, and if that is not showing mute or unmute, if it's showing audio with headphones, then his audio is not connected. So the bottom left of the Zoom screen.
after my performance at Fair Paws.
And mine is on the right.
Oh. So,
Well, I'm sorry, Jill. Hopefully you can get that figured out. If you do, just interrupt us, but I'm gonna move on to some more old business while you're getting that figured out. So now we've got the COVID-19 update. Mike, if you could give us a quick overview of that, please.
yes, Mr. Chair, we have had a little bit harder issue with that over the last 4 or 5 weeks than we had been having. We had a good run here at the department of keeping most of our employees free of positive tests. We had some exposures, but we have had several more positive tests within the department, employees within the department over the last few weeks. And of course, that's caused those employees to have to miss work and those who work close to them to quarantine. We do ask that they continue to work from wherever they are if they can, if that's possible, but to do what they can without being at their physical location. But we have had a few more issues with that. I will knock on wood, and I guess I'm always open to feedback. I apologize to any disruptions in service that may have caused for anyone, but I think we've been able to get through that with minimal disruption. I won't say with no disruption, but with minimal disruption. And so that's been a bit more of a challenge. One of the things I want to let the board know is I did send out a note to our staff. Obviously, I don't believe we are in a position that we can mandate our employees to do anything when it comes to their own personal decisions about their health. But I have encouraged all employees that as soon as they are eligible for vaccine, that I would encourage that they, if they've not had COVID yet, that they would go and reach out to their local county health department and try to get on the list for vaccines. So right now we're in phase 1B of vaccine delivery. So any of our employees, and I think we still have a few that are over 70, and any of our employees that are between the ages of 16 and 69 that have underlying conditions, whether that's heart conditions, diabetes, past cancer, any of those types of things, that they would be eligible to at least reach out to their county health department and see if they can get on the list to get a vaccine. Obviously, I think as I look at it, it depends on how the vaccine distribution goes over the next few months. It's looking like in March, we'll be in a phase where essential frontline workers can be eligible for the vaccine. I would have no doubt, or at least I hope, that our market staff, our brand investigators, our milk and egg inspectors, and our meat inspectors would be considered that essential frontline staff for food and agriculture and would be eligible for the vaccine. Somewhere a little bit later becomes essential government workers. So that's where people like myself would come in. But basically trying to make sure we encourage our employees when they become eligible for vaccine to consider getting that, because obviously the more of our staff we get vaccinated, the sooner we may be able to get back to a normal posture here without concerns about, without damaging anyone's health by making everybody be back together as we always are. So that's what we're doing right now. And that's what's been happening since the last time we reported in terms of how we're handling COVID-19 within the department. And that's all I would have to say, unless there are any questions or concerns that members of the board would have.
Any questions for Mike from the board? Wendy says, thanks for encouraging staff to get the vaccine. Thank you, Wendy. I agree with that. Mike, thanks for the update. The one thing I wanted to share that I'm learning here just lately is the variant that's in the UK right now. Sounds as if the COVID variant is considerably more transmissible and much harder to control than what we're currently dealing with. I haven't heard that it's any more deadly, but we've got 400,000 plus people dead already in the country from it. And I think we all know someone that's in our own communities that have passed from it. So The other thing is this vaccine sounds like this new variant form, it's about 80% effective on that, what I heard. So, you know, I appreciate you encouraging staff and everybody else to get the vaccine as soon as possible, because I agree with that 100%. So hopefully we can get more people on board with that attitude. We're going to move on now to Jill. There we go. You're still on mute, Jill. You're on mute.
I'm going to try to unmute him. Let's see what happens.
There, now you're not muted, Jill. Can we hear you now? No. I wonder if Jill should try to call in on the phone number, Mike. Can you share that with him somehow, please?
Yes, I think if yeah,
You can, because you can, Jill, you can hear us, I assume. Put your thumb up if you can hear us. Okay, so you can call in on your phone and still keep your audio, or your video, I mean. So why don't you try to do that and see if we can hear you then, please.
And it shows he's muted. Well, he wasn't making noise when he was on.
Well, while he's getting it called in on the phone, we're going to move forward into the executive planning process. Jill, don't forget your questions. We'll back up for you when you get audio. The executive planning process, Mike, do you want to give us an update on that, please?
Yes, sir. So just letting the board know where we are right now with the 2021 legislative session. A few things to be aware of. It's been a different type of legislative session. It's been a mix for us of in-person involvement and Zoom involvement. Mostly so far, we have involved ourselves in person because that's the committees we work with have requested that. I know our budget committee specifically requested to be with us in person, and we accommodated that. But largely, most people are participating, just like with this meeting today, are participating with the legislature via Zoom. And so legislatures and the legislators and the legislative staff are all learning new skills, just like we've had to learn for board meetings over the last few weeks or a few months. I'll kind of skip around. I'll come back to legislative bill drafts at the end because I think that might be where the most conversation is. The first thing is pretty easy on budget request process. They put us first in Section C Appropriations Subcommittee this year. So we have already presented our budget to the legislature. We did that on January 12th. You know, largely, I think that conversation went very well. Most of the questions were around, as we would expect, some of our general fund requests, you know, things like the designated surveillance area for brucellosis. And in fact, that Section C Appropriations Subcommittee, I think it may be February 5th, but I don't think I've got a firm date yet, wants to do a work session on both brucellosis and CWD, as they see those as two sort of pressures that might be on future legislatures as they put budgets together as the CWD issue spreads, as brucellosis, as we've seen the last few years. If we continue to see ELK move and see the boundaries of our DSA expand, you know, what does that do budgetarily? And so I think that's wise of them to do a work session on that and try to get a better understanding of how we look at that in the future. But as I said, our budget presentation compared to past sessions was very non-eventful. We were in front of the committee for a couple of hours. I presented, Brian Simonson presented, Dr. Zalewski presented, and Ethan Wilfor presented. And I think that process went very well. So now, as far as the budget outside of this work session that may happen with that committee later on, we are awaiting executive action on our budget items. And so starting points, one of the things I think I should say on the public record for the board, the only thing that changed between the budget this board approved and the previous governor approved and the budget that was released by Governor Gianforte on December 7th was an additional 2% of vacancy savings. That was done across the board, all state agencies. I will say Livestock Loss Board did have a cut to one of their decision packages. It was a general fund decision package asking for more operational funds for them, but that decision package was not cut from the budget. It was just cut in half. So those are the only changes we had going in with Governor Gianforte's budget. And I will say that we feel okay that we can manage and work our way through the additional 2% vacancy savings. You'll hear if you're watching the news that there are some agencies that have talked about that they would have to cut staff to make that happen. We don't believe so. We normally run here about 94, 95% of personal services in a given year. So that additional 2%, we think we can manage. And so we're not overly concerned about that. But I should point out that was the only change on the budgets. Obviously the committee has to take action on our decision packages, which includes our helicopter purchase request. It includes the lab one-time only equipment. It includes the re-record positions that we're asking for, turning on one-time only to finish off re-record going into next year, the first half of next year. So that's what they'll be taking executive action on. My understanding from the committee is they're going to hear all agencies before taking executive action. So far they have heard us, they have heard the Department of Agriculture, and today they are in their third day of hearings on the Department of Transportation. So they have yet to get to FWP, DEQ, or DNRC. So I suspect we've got at least another week or two before we will know where we are with that. So that's where we stand on the budget process. And I guess before I talk about LRBP, I'll stop and see if the board has comments or questions directly related to our 2023 biennium budget proposal for House Bill 2.
Any questions for Mike?
Mr. Chairman, this is Lila.
Yes.
I just have a comment at this time. I would like to compliment our staff for their presentation. I don't know how many other people were on listening to it, but as a old-time legislature that sat there and you'd start to nod when it went on and on in various departments, I think our staff should be, Mike and our staff should be complimented on getting to the issues and saying it like it needed to be said and then sitting down. So.
Well said, Lila. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Mike, you want to give us an LRBP update?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and just one last comment on the budget. Obviously, because of this year being unusual, I'll say that because we have Gene Curry and Alan Redfield on today, who are potentially going to be new board members here in a couple of months. That typically the board is there and involved in that process. Once again, that's one of the things we sort of lost this year because of COVID, was that involvement of having a board member in the room. But hopefully when we get to 2023, we'll have all this stuff long past us and we'll be able to get back to normal process of not just me and the staff presenting, but also having the board sitting behind us as well. All of us supporting what we're going in to ask the legislature for. On LRBP, House Bill 14 there are several bills that are involved with the long-range building process. Some of you may remember last time we had a funding proposal in House Bill 5. That's where we got the funding to go do the further design and architectural work to get together some drawings, floor plans, really start to put some visuals around the lab project. So that was in House Bill 5 because we were using all our money. The actual lab proposal we put forward to construct a new veterinary diagnostic lab and a new ag analytical lab attached to it, that is in House Bill 14, which we call the bonding bill here in Helena, because it does have some bonding requirements in it. It is actually kicking off its hearings as we sit here this morning. It is scheduled for 3 days of hearing with the long range planning subcommittee, joint subcommittee that has both Senate and House members. Mike Hopkins is the representative that is carrying that bill in name. And so we have Brian on and other staff that are on prepared if there are questions about our project. As Brian Simonson pointed out to me this morning, given that there's $71 million of appropriations in this bill and 36 million of those appropriations are for our lab, we're probably going to get questions. But I don't know when they're going to get to that. So we have staff prepared to do that. The governor's office has indicated to us that it's in the governor's budget as released on December 7th. So that indicates their support. And they had asked us to just make staff available informationally, that we did not need to go in as a proponent, but there wasn't a lot that we need to do because the fact that it's in the governor's budget indicates what we think about it. So it is actually going to be happening. We'll be paying attention to those hearings over the next 3 days so that we can be available to jump in and answer any questions that legislators may have about our project. The funding piece of it is laid out in the bill pretty well. I assume most of those questions will be technical questions about why the size that it is, why the biosecurity level that we've chosen. I'm sure one of the questions will be, does it have to be done now? Can it be done later? So those are what are the consequences if the legislature doesn't pass it right now? So I think those are the types of questions that we'll be dealing with. But just as a reminder for everyone listening and the board as well, I do believe one of the advantages of our project is that we are coming to the table with $7.6 million of our own money in that proposal to put down on the project. We're asking for general fund as well. And we're even proposing that we will be making annual bond payments. We're not asking general fund to do all that. So there are some things that are a little bit different about our project that are typical of these capital infrastructure projects, because a lot of times they come forward as 100% general fund. I'm hoping that whether it gets through this legislature or not, that those representatives and senators that are over there will recognize that the Department of Livestock is putting a lot of its own skin in the game to get this project done and not just being reliant upon state general fund to build us a new building. So I'll stop for questions and comments.
All well said, Mike. Jill, we'll give you the first shot at it. Hopefully you've got your audio fixed.
Do I have my audio
You
fixed?
do. Yes.
All right.
Good work, Jill.
Well, I had no question about that. I just had for my information, I guess. Does the Department of Livestock oversee the video auction sale in addition to the physical sales?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Stockton, yes, we do. We license satellite video auctions in the state. They are not they're not inspected in the same way that your physical markets are, but they do have to have a license from the state to operate. That license requires that they have a custodial account within the state of Montana so that they're managing the finances in a Montana bank. There is obviously in the change of ownership and those things, you have our inspectors involved in the movement of those animals once they've been sold. But it's a little bit more limited than it is in our physical markets where, as you're very well aware, we have employees that are there all the time as they're selling livestock. With the satellite video auction, it's more of a licensure, and to maintain that licensure, they have to meet these basic requirements that we've asked of them, like having a custodial account, that custodial account being in the state of Montana, being in a bank in the state of Montana. But we're not physically on the video in the background the way we would be at a physical market where our staff are actually there at the sale.
What about if their sale day is interfering with other auction days?
So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Stockton, that's a very interesting question. It has never been addressed in state law. Obviously, it's unless you're going to go talk to a legislator and they've got a placeholder out there about revising livestock laws, and there's a number of them that do. That's about the only way you could deal with some of those issues right now. Otherwise, we would have to deal with those issues in 2023 if we wanted to see a little bit more interaction with those satellite video auctions. Our satellite video auction statutes were written in the mid-90s, and I think we can all agree that in 25 years, how the technology of how that's done and I would say that the word I would use is the pervasiveness of how many cattle are actually sold using that methodology has changed a lot in the last 25 years. And so I think we would all readily admit that our statutes, our state laws concerning satellite video auctions, first of all, they're called satellite video auctions, which is not really in law. Really what we're talking about are internet sales. I don't believe that our statutes are probably as modern as they should be, and it is probably something that the industry and the department needs to take a look at going into the future, unless someone had a bright idea and a connection to one of those legislators that are still sitting on a placeholder regarding the Department of Livestock, who might be willing to do something with it this session, if industry partners or anyone else had an idea of things that need to change there.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, Jill, that gets you caught up with the questions. We'll jump back up to the LRBP and the presentation that Mike has given us about where we sit with the legislature. Any questions from the board concerning how that affects the Department of Livestock and our lab proposal?
Mr. Chairman, this is Lila. I have a question for Mike in the back. Can any of us get on to testify on behalf of the labs? Because it's very odd to me that we're not presenting our proposal, but it does not limit, or does it? People, obviously you've got to get on, you got to get your placeholder a day in advance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which might limit us if it started today, but maybe people just have placeholders. I don't know.
So, Mr. Chair, Ms. Taylor, we can put in a request today if you would like to. I mean, obviously today we're having our board meeting to try and make comments during the hearing tomorrow. We'll probably know here within another hour and a half whether there was any discussion about us yet or not. They'll probably close that hearing down by 10:30 or 11, if not sooner, so they can begin to get ready for floor session. And I don't think there's anything wrong. Obviously, we do have, I've received input from industry partners that they are making comments as proponents, and they are set up to do that. In fact, actually, most of them are over there in person, I would imagine, and will be in the hearing room and have the ability to make comments on our behalf. And so we do have support of our industry stakeholders there that I've talked to. I think they're all supportive of us doing something with the lab. So we'll have that. But as far as board members who would want to make a comment, today we can get that set up for you to do tomorrow when we're not having a board meeting, if you want to do that tomorrow morning. Also, I'm sure you're welcome if you're still here in town. I know you're here in town with me, but you may be on your way back home. But if you're still here in town, I'm sure they'd welcome you in person. They're sort of starving to see real people over there right now. And at least I know when I go over there, I generally get attacked because legislators are used to having lots of people around and they have no one around. And I don't mean I get attacked in a negative way. It's like they all want to talk to somebody. So it's kind of interesting. But yes, I think you would have that ability to make those to make comments if you want to. The reason I talk about the technicalities of the bill, and I'll say that for the members of the public and for the board to understand, just like we talked about last time with some of these appropriation bills that are not House Bill 2. So things like House Bill 5, which we were in last time, House Bill 10, which we were in last time with our IT project, House Bill 14, the long-range bonding bill. Yeah, these appropriations bills are sort of larger than one agency, and it is very typical. It was typical in the last administration. I think it'll be typical in this administration that our budget director sort of takes the lead and then ask agencies to fill in and answer questions. But I think the budget director and the governor's office sort of want to step in and take the lead and say, you know, they are representing all of the executive agencies that have projects in there. Now, obviously ours is the largest, but there's also a Department of Revenue, new liquor warehouse and some other things. So it's not just, that's the other thing that's hard. The House Bill 14 is not just the lab. It is every long-range project that is proposing to be bonded by not only the executive branch, but the Department of Justice, the Montana University system, all of it rolled into one big package.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I just wanted to make sure that people knew that we have the ability to get online if we'd like, or go over there and support this lab, because as you all know, this is, I think, our big chance, and that we should not weaken. Thank you.
Thank you, Lila, and thank you, Mike. And I agree with that, Lila, very much. It's been a long process that we've been going through. It's my opinion, and I don't want it to sound like it's a threat or anything, because it's not, but it's my opinion that if we don't get it done in 21 or 23, Mike and I have discussed this, that probably the next discussion is to just wind down the lab. So hopefully the members of the public and the legislators understand where we sit as far as the building and its age and its usefulness, and they'll correlate that understanding in with interest rates are at an all-time low. It's a perfect time to be borrowing money as a business. Any businessman or woman worth their salt understands that. And prior to what appears to me to be a situation where we're probably going to see some inflation take hold down the road, prior to that potentially occurring with all the stimulus that's taken place over the last year in the US and across the world, I would think that now would be the time to be trying to get some of these contracts locked up prior to this cost changing by 50 to 100% higher than what we've currently got it estimated. So with any luck, the legislators will see this as an opportunity to improve the state and get some infrastructure building going on. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina.
Yes.
And I'd like to take a moment. There are board members on now who were not board members back in 17, when the Department of Livestock got put on a one-time only budget, which I actually, in testifying to one of the committees, when it was through, I thanked them, because I thought it caused our department to do a real serious look at itself, to really delve into each portion of our department. What were their programs? What was their funding for those programs? And what was their budget for those programs, and all the rest of the stuff that goes with it. And the long and the short of it is, we, through Mike and everyone else, have continued to be absolutely on top, as they had to be in 2017, to testify before legislature. And it not only got us back on the right track on our budget, but when we get called in now, our folks, Mike and all our folks walk in there, they have everything put together precisely, concisely. They can hand out everything to whatever committee they're talking to, which lets that committee know exactly what's going on. And we've done the same thing in putting together the information for the lab. And one of the things Mike talked about this morning is the committee that's going to work together to discuss brucellosis and CWD. And one of the things we are asking about the new lab is that we move to a biosecurity 3, specifically for things like CWD. And so we have a staff that have melded all this together, and they can walk over there and they can hand it to the legislatures, and they can explain it in English so those legislatures understand where we are and what we need this for our state. And I think they need to be commended for what they've done and how they pulled it together and how they've been able to assist the legislators to understand the need that we have here. And I want to thank them for it.
Okay, thank you, Nana. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Mike, thanks for the update on that. If you'd please keep the board apprised as to, where the legislature is currently at concerning our lab, and any discussion that you hear, I'd appreciate that. And as Lila says, if you can help get opportunities for people to present through Zoom or in person to support the lab, I would appreciate that help. Okay?
Mr. Chairman,
Ye-
Gene Curry.
Yes, Gene.
I was wondering if I would be willing to drive to Helena and speak in support of the diagnostic lab if I knew a time that I could be in front of the committee. So tomorrow or Friday, whichever would work. And I'm sorry, Mike, that I missed your call yesterday. I was laying on the ground welding on a gate, so I couldn't answer it. But so I guess the question is to you, Mike. Do you know what the schedule would be and the opportunity?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Curry, that hearing will start at 8:30 tomorrow morning, and it's scheduled to start at 8:30 on Friday morning. Now, I don't know if they'll get, I'm assuming that this is scheduled this way, and those who've been in the legislature could probably tell me better. I've never been in House Bill 14 before. It's our first time with it. I'm assuming it's scheduled that way because they think it might take 3 days, but it might take 2. I'm sure it won't take just 1. That would be sort of unusual, I think, if it does. So it may be possible that there's not a hearing on Friday. But I'm pretty sure there'll still be one tomorrow. And there probably will be a hearing on Friday. It'll probably spill over that long unless they're very efficient with how they're doing it. But that will start at 8:30 here in Helena tomorrow morning, just as it did this morning.
All right, well, maybe this afternoon, if Mr. Chairman, maybe this afternoon, if we can discuss, you might know more about what happened today and what the schedule looks like for tomorrow. So I'll visit with you after the meeting, if that's appropriate.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Curry, and probably for all folks listening, there is also always the opportunity. I know it's not as effective as hearing from people in person, but if you're just unable to participate in person, there is an option on the website, as they're doing more things now than they used to do before, for the opportunity to provide written testimony if you would like to do that too. If you just don't have time to engage with them in person, there is a way to submit written testimony to the committee through the legislative website.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Mike, whatever emails you send out concerning this, if you'd include Gene Curry and Alan Redfield, seeing they're the next appointments to the board, and it sounds like Gene's probably going to be the next chair. I'm sure he'd like to be directly involved. So when you send out an email update on information like this, please include them. All right, we're going to move on to the next subject on our agenda. And that,
we got
yeah.
one more under that, if that's where you're going. I just want to make sure you don't skip down to the performance evaluation yet.
What do you got, Mike?
Just want to make a quick update on bill drafts. So I did want to make sure the board was aware. The 3 Board of Livestock bill drafts, we made a decision towards the end of December to let those go. When I talked to staff, none of them were really tied that action had to be taken now. We were looking at the number of bill drafts that were out there, which was about 3,000, looking at a hybrid session and realizing that our priority probably needed to be focused on the lab, that we wanted to make sure our focus, that was our #1 legislative priority, and not to have anything distract from that. Also, one of the bills we were looking at dealt with meat, knowing that was going to be a controversial subject, and I hate to put it this way, but knowing we were probably going to be needing to play some defense on meat, that's probably, again, we needed to make sure that's where our focus was. So we did not move those particular items forward. There are things that can wait for a future legislature. livestock loss board bills, George has already gone through, but just the one thing I'd say is those 3 bills that were brought by the livestock loss board have all been heard already in Senate Ag for their first House hearing, and they all have received executive action. And if they've not already been to the floor, they should be getting to the Senate floor sometime soon for a vote. And so those are moving along on their way. There has been relatively little, surprisingly, legislatively going on with livestock yet, and we're 3 weeks into session. So there are a number of bill drafts that I've had some legislators reach out to me. So I just want to make you aware of some issues that are coming. There will be a bill potentially dealing with local Montana food choice. In that bill, it includes some provisions for raw milk. It's very similar to some of the other things we've talked about in the past, though, where it limits herd sizes and puts a lot of sideboards on it. There is also a potential bill draft dealing with our milk dating. So our rules on milk dating that require milk to be sold 12 days after pasteurization, the wording of that bill draft, once again, it's not been introduced yet. I've talked to the potential sponsor. He's not even certain he's going to introduce it during this session. He just wanted to make sure it was out there and ready to go if he makes up his mind to do it. It would actually take away that 12-day requirement and let the manufacturer decide the best buy date that they want to put on their milk, but it would have some requirements of the fact that it would have to have a date on it and how that date would have to be placed on the carton. And then basically that would then nullify the administrative rules we have with regard to milk dating. So that's an issue that's out there. And then there are several issues or ideas floating around on meat processing. One that I have seen a draft for so far, and I should point out that we were asked by Senate Ag to do an educational session on meat and poultry inspection yesterday, which we did for that committee, and I think went really well, and we really got some good questions. I think the chair is actually trying to make sure the committee is prepared as those bills might be coming to them at some point during the session. But one of the drafts I've read so far, it would basically create a new custom exemption for a product marked local Montana product to be able to be sold retail, but actually done by a custom exempt processor, which unfortunately, I think, I don't know what we're going to do, right, when that bill comes. It depends on, obviously I don't know what the governor's office mind is on some of these issues either, so I can't share that with you today. But we do know that that particular idea would then put us in a position where we would not meet federal law, and there's potential consequences to that. So there's a lot of, I would say, well-intentioned things that people are trying to do. They've not been introduced yet, so I don't know if they're actually going to be introduced and become bills and get hearings, but I'll try to stay in contact with the board, and I guess I'll put out there that if on any of these issues we've dealt with in the past, meat, milk dating, raw milk, if any of the mindset of the board has changed towards those issues, those are discussions that we'll want to have. But I am very well aware of what our historical position from the board has been on those types of items. So, I think we don't really have to discuss them in detail today, but it's things I want to put on the board's radar that, there's always a potential when we're in session, and for board members that haven't been a part of this board during past sessions, I think it's important to note that you should always be aware that one day I might be calling you saying, we need a meeting later in the week because I need to know what you think about X, Y, or Z, because the governor's office has asked us to take a position, and I need to know what position the board wants me to take. Of course, I guess the governor also always has the right to tell me what position they want us to take. And so that's another factor that plays into things. But sometimes it'll come from the governor's office saying, we want to know what the Board of Livestock thinks, and I may have to pull you together at a moment's notice if any of these bills start moving. But based on past sessions, it's so far been even though there's lots of placeholders out there, it's so far kind of a quiet session on the livestock front compared to my first two sessions.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Any questions of Mike from the board or public? All right, let's move on to the performance evaluation. Mike, you're doing such a great job presenting. Let's hear a little more.
Well, Mr. Chair, yeah, sorry I'm having to do most of the talking today, but we're doing pretty administrative stuff today. The performance evaluation process, as I stated, our goal is to have that completed by the end of this month. We have most staff complete. In fact, I think the only outlier right now is actually me, I'll admit to the board. And I'm planning to do my final, all of the folks who report to me have done their self-evaluations. I've just got to have a final meeting with them to go through and finalize all the paperwork. And the reason that got delayed is I wasn't expecting we'd be presenting our budget the second week of January. That normally happens much later, and some other things that moved up my priority list. But my goal is now that I'll have this board meeting behind me, we'll have House Bill 14 behind us, we'll have our budget behind us, that next week I'll finally be able to meet with the staff that report to me, look at their self-evaluation, talk about my observations, their performance, finalize that paperwork and get it placed into their files. Out in the field, we've made significant progress. I'm sure there's an outlier or two because of fall run that we haven't gotten a person in front of a computer yet. And when I say fall run, I should point out that fall run has sort of turned into winter run. So I'm sure we have some outliers out there, a market inspector or two that we just haven't had time to get them to sit down in front of the computer and do what they need to do on their evaluation so we can get that completed. But we have made significant progress on that, and I commit to the board that, as stated during December, that by January 31st we'll have all of our hay in the barn on performance evaluations for 2020 for that calendar year.
So you're getting everything accomplished for the performance evaluations within the department. We're right on schedule, huh, Mike?
Yes, we should be. We've got 11 more days and we should be right on schedule.
Okay, so there was a request that jumped up. You might not have seen it, but Wendy's having a little bit of a difficult time hearing you. I'm sure the mask is muffling things just a little bit. So when you talk, please try to get fairly close to the microphone.
Yes, I'm seeing Wendy right now, and I'm going to say, can you hear me better now, Wendy? Well, and here's why, because my microphone was sitting behind my computer. That didn't help. And it probably doesn't help that I'm talking through this mask either. That's welcome to the new world.
All right, so you got the microphone closer to you now. Any questions concerning the performance evaluations in the department from the board? Before we move on to Mike's performance evaluation, any questions about the overall department and where we're at with performance evaluations? Okay, seeing none, Mike, we're going to move into the executive officer performance evaluation. As in the past, you've had the ability, as other staff, when they're being evaluated, to choose to conduct this under executive session or in public. So at this time, you have the opportunity to decide how you'd like us to go forward with that, please.
So, Mr. Chair and board members, with your discretion, what I would like to do is offer you sort of a hybrid today, which is we can go into executive session, because I do know when we go into executive session, people just feel a little bit more comfortable that they're not going to make a mistake in what they may say, and I'm not going to make a mistake in what I may say and it be misread by other members of our staff or the public. So I propose that we do that, but I also would like the opportunity that when we open back up, that we can have some public discussion. So if there's anything that any board members, when we share evaluation, if there's anything you say, you know, just ask if there's something that you would like to say publicly. And then we can do that too, because I'm sure there may be some things that board members want to say, maybe not even just about my individual performance, but maybe about the performance of the department, that they may want to be able to say in a way that that other staff and stakeholders hear that. So if you would be okay with that, I'll offer a hybrid, and I guess we would start with the executive session so we get that out of the way, and then we can come back and have any public conversation that we feel like we need to have before we close off that topic.
That sounds good, Mike. So how does that work for the people that are not on the board that are on the call? Do they just get put into it? We just go into a different room and they just sit there and wait for us to come back, or how does this work?
So what will happen, thanks for mentioning technology, is Dan Olson is supposed to be, and he can send me a chat here if he's already done that, was going to make me the host. And then I think I have the ability to just move people out to the waiting room. And when we're done with the executive session, I'll go get those people out of the, like when they first come into the meeting, you're in a waiting room being allowed to be let in. We'll kick everybody except the current voting board members out to the waiting room, and then when the executive session's over, we'll bring everybody back in. And I wish I knew how much time that would take, but I guess that depends on how much you guys have to tell me. So we'll see how that goes. And I'm now the host, so I can begin doing that. I believe. Let me check my settings here. Yes, I now have an option to put people in the waiting room, so I can begin doing that as we go maybe to a recess, and then we'll start an executive session once I get that done.
So that sounds good, Mike. Before you start putting everybody into a waiting room, why don't, it's 9:20 right now, why don't we have a goal for the people that are not on the board? With any luck, we'll be back by 10 o'clock. It'd probably take 30 to 40 minutes, I would imagine, to get through this evaluation. Do you agree?
I agree.
So for those on the call here, if you could plan on, hopefully we'll be ready to be back out of executive session at 10 o'clock. Not to say it won't be earlier. Mike might not have a job when we're done. You don't know.
If I don't have a job, you'll have one. So
You'll have a job.
You'll have a job.
I'm going to stop recording now, Chair.
Are we recording?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Mike, as we discussed in the executive officer review, there's a few, one or two or three of us that would like to make some public comments, and you agreed to allow us to do that. Is it okay if I take the time now to make mine?
You are the chair.
Okay. All right, so at the very end of the executive officer review, I wanted to make some comments about Mike that are fairly brief, but I think the public and the future board members need to understand. It boils down to this for me. Mike is a very effective executive officer who has the respect of his peers. It is my opinion that he has larger things to accomplish than just this Department of Livestock. And it's my hope that future boards of livestock will keep that in mind and recognize this and utilize his greater abilities to the department's advantage. So continue to challenge Mike, and I think that you'll like the results that are yielded. The other thing I would say that I had to mention was in the executive officer's goals and objectives, and I'm sure future boards will make this own determination whether or not this is accurate or not, but these are my suggestions. I believe it's time for the department to launch a pilot program using technology and mobile devices with cloud capability for brand inspections, both ownership, change, and movement. This project should have the goal of being paperless in the field by 2025 and be fully utilized by all local inspectors and employees of the Brands Enforcement Division. Simultaneously, I believe this project should be branched out into the Animal Health Department, gathering data that can be safely and privately accessed by producers for their health and testing results, and more that, you know, I'm not necessarily even aware of at this point, using this technology. Another recommended priority goes into the communications officer if the futures board decide that that's of importance. It'd be my suggestion that
in the granary, and it's in a feed or some kind
who's
of
not on mute?
Oh.
So it'd be my recommendation that using this technology, using the technology we have to interact and update producers of Department of Livestock advancements and actions, they can use things like mass text messages or phone alerts that we currently have, and there's more coming, that can be used to interact with producers. And I feel that this is going to be an important attribute that the department will need to expand on as we move forward with emergency preparedness and producer education. So I just wanted to get that in the public sphere. So with that, Lila, I understand you had a couple comments to make.
Well, I could have written this out, but it might have taken me a while. But I just wanted to thank Mike. You know, he came, as all of you know, and the two new board members know as much as the rest of us, that Mike came in here when this department was in pretty much disarray. He was an unknown commodity. We were thankful to have someone come in that we could trust and take over. And Mike has proved to all of us that he wasn't just talk, that he actually walked the walk. And there's no greater place to prove that than with the legislature. And I think Mike has their respect. I will tell you, the other day when I was listening, I was going, yes, Mike, you shortened it up. And Mike has learned a lot about that since he's been here, about keeping it succinct to what he needed to say. And I would just say, as someone who's going off the board, a big thank you to Mike.
Thank you, Lila. Are there any other comments concerning Mike's evaluation that he wouldn't be embarrassed by?
Mike, Brett, this is, excuse me, this is Nina.
Yes, Nina.
And I think Mike is to be congratulated for keeping this department running very smoothly during uncharted territory and in very difficult times. And I think he's doing an incredible job with it.
Okay. Anything else before Wendy?
Yeah, this is Wendy. I would like to say in my short time on the board that I have just really appreciated Mike's professionalism, his trustworthiness, his effective communication skills, fiscally responsible. And I do feel I've just been very impressed with how the board and the Department of Livestock has been run thus far. I agree that we need to push the Board of Livestock into a more public forward-facing organization, and agree with all of those goals, those aspirations that Brett has just iterated. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Anybody else? Okay. Well, with that, we're good with that item on the agenda now, correct, Mike? We've just finished the performance evaluation for the executive officer. Now we'll move into the pay plan. As everybody that has been involved with the Board of Livestock and Department of Livestock through the years understands that Mike has been at a disadvantage to his peers when it comes to pay. And he was kind enough to take this position at that disadvantage and help us get through some tough times. The board is of the unanimous opinion that it's time to help Mike get back to parity with his peers. And so I would ask if there was any motions out there concerning pay for Mr. Mike Honeycutt. Wendy?
Yes, this is Wendy. Yes, I would like to make a motion to increase the executive officer's salary to an hourly rate of $54.80 effective January 1st, 2021. This will align the Montana Department of Livestock executive salary with his peers from other agencies, state agencies.
Okay, thank you, Wendy, for that motion. Is there a second?
This is Sue. I'd like to second it.
Okay, Sue, thank you. All the way from Costa Rica. Any further discussion on the motion on the floor concerning Mike's pay? Any further discussion? Okay, All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Okay, seeing none, Mike, the motion passes unanimously. Nice work serving as executive officer in the last year. Please continue to keep up the good work in the coming time that you're here. With that, we just had a recess. Our apologies from the board to everybody that was left in the waiting room. It took a little longer than we thought it would to get through the performance evaluation, but we're ready to move on. So the next item on the agenda is the Animal Health and Food Safety Division reports.
Mr. Chair.
Mike?
Yes, I just wanted to interject here and see if you would be open to switching around. I think Lindsay Simon is out there on the line. Our
Okay.
legal counsel, we are paying for her time. So we probably would like, and I know that I think that her update today, based on previous conversation, is going to be fairly quick. So I thought we might dispense with that.
That sounds great, Mike. Thank you for making me aware. Lindsay, we'll skip ahead to the legal counsel update. If you would present what you have on that today, please.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is Lindsay Simon, counsel for the board. As Mike said, my update is pretty brief. I'm not sure what the status was at the last meeting, but I believe we discussed it. Maybe we didn't. But there was an issue that had come up regarding milk inspection assessments that are collected by the Milk Control Bureau for the benefit of the department. The Milk Control Bureau had received some letters from counsel representing a debtor, Dean Foods, in a bankruptcy case down in Texas, stating that they considered their preliminary investigation considered some of those assessments collected to be preferences in the bankruptcy. We responded to their letter, and as of now, that issue has been resolved, and they have agreed and confirmed that they will not be pursuing that, and that they do not consider it to be a preferential payment. So that matter is resolved, and that's really all I have to report on. So good news there.
Okay. Any questions from the board for Lindsay? Well, Lindsay, thank you very much. Appreciate a short legal counsel update that does not need to go into executive session. We certainly do appreciate that. Okay, now we'll go back. If Mike, you got the thing to do here, move back into the animal health portion.
Yes.
Okay, Lindsay, thank you. Animal Health and Food Safety Division reports. Marty or Tawny, I assume you guys are on the call, and you can start into the Animal Health Bureau.
Good afternoon, board. Tawny Szymanski, Animal Health Bureau. Just one quick item from us today. The proposed rule change that we had pertaining to inspection requirements for swine entering the state of Montana has been out for public comment and closed. As the board will hopefully remember, we proposed to take that window of inspection from 10 days to 30 days to be consistent with federal standards as well as other swine importing states. We had one comment during the 30-day comment period from the Montana Pork Producers Council. I think you have a copy of their comment in your board packets. They were in support of that. So we are asking the board to approve the proposed changes as they were filed with the Secretary of State's office so that we can adopt this rule change.
I will make a motion.
This is Wendy. I will second it.
Okay, any other comments, discussion?
Mr. Chair, just a point of order, if you could get Mr. Waldner to state what his motion is, whether it's to adopt or not, that would help.
Well, I make a motion to approve the rule change.
All right. I make a lot of motions too, Ed. All right, so we got a first and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? I didn't hear everybody say aye supporting it. Is there anybody that opposes this?
That's because I didn't vote aye. And maybe
Okay.
I will, just with the idea, and this has been mine from the start on this one, that just because the feds do something and we feel and I know that Connie and Dr. Zalewski would say that's not true, that just because the feds changed theirs, that this state has to make sure that our requirements are specific and right for our state. And that's the only reason I vote no on it, just so I can make a comment.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you. So the motion passes. All right, Tawny, did you have anything more or was that it?
No, thank you, board. That's all we had from Animal Health this month.
All right. Any questions for Tawny before I let her go?
No, Mr. Chairman, this is Lila. Can I ask Dr. Zalewski a question?
You bet.
Marty, this is Lila. I had questions from a veterinarian come through about a possible brucellosis positive, something that was in the animal health letter that I thought used to get, I never saw mine, this about a possible brucellosis positive animal in Idaho that came from Montana. Can you clarify, tell me what's going on there?
Yeah, this was so Ms. Taylor, Mr. Chair, there's two issues that you're, I think, addressing. One is that you were inquiring about a distribution list or a notification for whether it's Animal Health Bureau newsletters or the email updates that I used to copy the board, and I believe that fell off the radar, and I apologize for that you guys are probably not on that list. That list is actually a veterinarian, an accredited veterinarian list by design, and not necessarily a public distribution, but by the same token, I think it's totally on point and appropriate for the board to be in that loop about how and what we're communicating there. So I believe that issue has been rectified. The second issue is the actual brucellosis suspect. That communication just related to a slaughter trace that was linked back to one of several premises in Montana or potential premises in Montana, and we're still working on identifying that potential source and working with producers that may have contributed to that animal or contributed that animal to that slaughter group.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Well, since I'm glad to know that the board is back on the list, but it was specified that it was sort of south central Montana, which sometimes includes us, and these counties that have now been, that were a mandatory vaccination. And I would have thought that maybe that was pertinent to come to the board, whether we know where the trace back is now. I guess I'd like to know how, first of all, if the animal went to slaughter, it had to have been sold or consigned or something. So was it not brand inspected?
So Ms. Taylor, those brands do not get read at slaughter, either because there are no staff available to read those brands at slaughter, or because that hide is gone, typically because that hide is gone by the time those lab results are received. So brand inspection in that case does not give us a lot of good information as far as what particular source that animal came from. But the animal, from what Dr. Orliska is sharing with me, came from Miles City, but we really don't know the location, the ranches that may have contributed to that animal, and that's why we really, or that was the reason why we are kind of continuing to contact producers and try to find out what the potential source could be. I want to make sure that I share that, you know, slaughter traces are a routine kind of a routine activity that we do on occasion when we wind up receiving non-negative samples at slaughter. And so typically it is not something that rises to the level of either media releases or broad notifications while we're working through that investigation, unless in fact we locate a positive herd.
Okay, I think I didn't get all that quite new. I mean, I think you said what you wanted to say, but what I wanted to say, as somebody who sells in Miles City, had I known that, I probably would have been even more nervous and called you before now. Because I think it's so important that if you get a positive animal from a county or an area that maybe doesn't necessarily give you positive animals, that it's even more important. So I'm a little bit, and I will tell you, as somebody who sold a bull in Miles City once and got a call from the plant in Idaho when our kids had filled it full of buckshot, and we're told by the plant in Idaho that we would pay for that bull, even though they had, and we did pay back the money we got for that bull. So I'm having a little hard time of finding out that if we had a cow, or I don't even know what it was, cow, steer, whatever, in Idaho at a plant, that we have no trace back to a brand. That really is something amuck there as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, so Ms. Taylor, Mr. Chair, Ms. Taylor, you raised several issues. This animal did not have official ID. And so at this point, that is the only way, the only surefire way that we can trace an animal to the herd of origin. And I want to clarify that this animal is not necessarily positive. It tested non-negative at on the screening test at the laboratory on the slaughter sample.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. So how long has it been since it did a screening positive?
I want to say we received that information several weeks ago, like early January.
And this is Wendy. I have a question. What do you mean by official ID?
Official ID is the ID that is unique and approved by the USDA. So that could include, or that can be, and it also can be traced to the either veterinarian that placed the ID on the animal, or it can be placed to the premises where, to actually the ranch or operation where the animal was tagged. And so that includes that 14-digit 840 tag, or a metal clip noose tag that's also official, or a Bangs brucellosis vaccination tag.
And it didn't have any of those?
That's correct. That's our understanding.
So then how do we even know it came from Montana? I mean,
So that's where our work gets more difficult. And so they look at the kill sheets that have the animals that are in order on that kill day. They try to reconcile that with the sellers and with the lot that came in. And then we try to match that up to the market pen and who may have contributed animals to either that pen or on that day. So, but I think Ms. Palmer, I think your question illustrates the challenges that state animal health officials have and federal animal health officials have in finding the sources of diseased animals without official IDs. And while the state of Montana really relies heavily on brands for movement information for groups of animals, and I've said in the past, I don't know how states without strong brand laws actually get their work done. In the case of slaughter animals, it is not sufficient because that brand information is not collected.
does the animal get its own official ID when it's in the slaughterhouse, or is it just off of a back tag?
Usually the latter, correct.
The back tag.
Yeah.
And that's how you're pursuing it right now, is through the back tag.
I do not know the specific. I think we had a ranch tag that was collected, and we were trying to match up the ranch tag. But I'd have to defer the specifics of what information we were provided to Dr. Liska, if the board would like to explore that.
And what do you mean by a ranch tag?
Like a dangle tag, like a plastic tag that might be orange, BT 105 or something, or yellow or whatever, or
Well, and once you're at the slaughterhouse and the animal's slaughtered, don't you lose that RFID tag or official tag of whatever you're commenting on when it gets there anyway?
no, the tag is retained with the blood sample, so that when the animals are bled, the identification is captured and retained with those samples.
And then one last question, when you go interstate, aren't you required to have proof of brucellosis, whether it's bangs or something?
There are various exemptions for slaughter movements. And so when animals go directly to slaughter, they don't have to meet some of those requirements, which is unfortunate.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I help Dr. Zaluski on a couple of points too that I think finer points that probably need to be made?
Yes.
So one of the other things too is matching that up to what I think is perceived by folks about what's happening on the slaughter side with brand inspection, which is that when those animals are brand inspected out of a sale, which the real purpose for brands is ownership and deterring any possibility of there being theft or fraud involved. So, you know, there's not an obligation for that slaughter plant to say this animal has this brand and that matches to this blood sample. So if a non-negative test comes back, we can go back and say the animal had this brand on it. With the purpose of brands in the slaughter world is again about identification, ownership, and theft and fraud. So a slaughterhouse, if they buy an animal directly from you, there has to be a brand inspection and they have to hold that hide until it's inspected. But in this case, there would have been no, I believe, and Dr. Zaluski or Ethan, if you're on, there'd have been no obligation for them to hold those hides. There'd have been no obligation for them to match those hides to a blood sample. As Dr. Zaluski said, sometimes when you have official ID, you know, they'll take down those official IDs, but even that, if somebody gets off a line in doing their chart, you can sometimes get to the wrong animal because you have an official ID, and if they didn't do that right, you can have issues. So I just want to just say that one of the issues here that maybe is not what the line of questioning was intended to go to, but I do believe we have a lot more confidence in the efficacy of what's happening when animals go to slaughter and how they're tracking and keeping tracing information. You know, I think people may have a lot more confidence in that in terms of than what's actually happening. So in this case, you get a non-negative test, and the best they can do is say, we received animals from this location on that day. We bought it in this pen, and who knows how many owners contributed to that pen, which in purpose is why Dr. Zaluski was communicating that out to, and staff were communicating that out to veterinarians to make sure they're aware and on the look. The difficulty is being able to trace that back to a ranch of origin. And I just wanted to mention that sometimes some of the things we lose in this is, you know, people may wonder why we deal with that information as securely as we do. Part of it is that certainly one thing we could do is we could put out a press release and say there was a brucellosis non-negative animal sourced from a sale in Miles City. But if we do that, that actually does more harm for us outside of the state than it does good in trying to figure out where it came from. And Dr. Zaluski, a question I would ask that you can address, and I think Ms. Taylor has some more questions, is the other thing too is that if that, I would assume in that pen, none of those animals were DSA origin because the yard veterinarian would have tested them if that were the case. Am I correct in that?
That's correct, and they would have had a tag as well because that is one of the requirements for exiting the DSA. And based on our work, retrospective work to look at animal movements as it relates to exiting the DSA or following DSA regulations, we know that compliance is extremely high. If not 100%, it's certainly real close.
Mr. Chairman, I have a follow-up.
Yep.
Marty, if that had come because of the counties now that are mandatory vaccination, that animal, had it come from, say, Bighorn County, my county, where we do have concern about stuff coming out of Wyoming, okay? Would that animal have been stopped in Miles City had it not been bangs vaccinated?
What I'll share with you, Ms. Taylor, Mr. Chair, is that yes, we do have strong enforcement for and communication for when we receive animals that are from Wyoming to ensure that if they are required to be tested, that they are either are tested or they come to us with and get a test performed.
Marty, that wasn't my question. My
Okay.
question was, if that animal that didn't have a bangs tag came out of Bighorn County, Montana, would it have been stopped in Miles City and not allowed to sell because it didn't have a bangs tag?
Yeah, so I think if I understand you correctly, you're asking for enforcement or validation of Montana's vaccination requirements. And what I'll say is, yes, we have. I know that Dr. Liska has communicated with market veterinarians on numerous occasions regarding vaccination requirements, and so. I guess I would say, probably optimistically, Ms. Taylor, I would say I hope so. But without knowing the specific case, I cannot tell you for certain.
So just to help Dr. Zaluski there, because that's more on the brand side with the enforcement with the staff. If you remember, our staff are writing tickets for folks. We had several board members remember. It seems like it was only a year ago, but it was probably longer than that. We had a little bit of controversy about writing those tickets out of Headwaters, which receives a lot of DSA cattle. But it's a misdemeanor offense. It's a fine. And so we have written tickets for that. The question I don't know is clearly answered is whether or not we have the authority to hold that animal from being sold because it wasn't vaccinated. I don't believe we actually would have legal authority to keep the animal from selling. I think what we have, and it would be tested if it's DSA origin, so you at least have that. But I think our legal authority is we can write a ticket, but we can't stop them from consigning and selling their animal. And I'll check the law on that, and that may be something that in the future we want to look at.
And I received a note here from Dr. Liska saying that if the animals are coming from don't have an ID and they're not going direct to slaughter, they will be that they are ticketed. And I don't know, Dr. Liska, if you're certainly, or if Mr. Chair, if you want to provide have Dr. Liska provide further comments, or Dr. Szymanski.
Is there any more comments that are needed on this, Lila?
Might not be any more needed, but I will tell you, as somebody who got a couple calls on this from veterinarians, and someone who didn't know about it, and someone, when it was central Montana, got a little nervous about where it came from. And second of all, if we have these bangs vaccinated rules in these counties, like my county, and I've had to adult vaccinate a couple things because we missed them. Why the heck then, if you let them on through, what good is it? If we let them on through without being either bled or, I mean, this is for a future board to deal with, but it's kind of silly. Because then we're, it's not doing anything. And if we can't identify them when they get there, what good is mandatory bangs vaccination? To me, mandatory means you have it or you don't sell. But we obviously need to do more work on that. And maybe just before I get off the pulpit here, let us know next month, will you, what's going on, please, Marty? Please.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina. May I ask Marty a question?
You bet, Nina.
Marty, are you telling us that this animal did not have a bangs ear tag?
Yeah, I'm saying this animal did not have an official ID at all, which would include bangs tags.
So if it's a female then there should be paperwork identifying it as a female without bangs testing identification. Otherwise, it's got to be a male. So this goes back to some of the discussions we've had in the past about the need for Montana to have bangs ear tags for identification for just these kind of situations.
But Ms. Taylor, I'm not sure that I follow the additional requirements that a female would have to have going to market, going direct to slaughter. So we might need to clarify that a little bit for us to chase down or respond.
Well, this is Mike, and I'll just say, I think, again, when I listen to that, the three things I would want to make sure are takeaways from the conversation, outside of the point that, unfortunately, the board got off the distribution list for this veterinarian, the newsletter, which I know Dr. Zalewski, we talked about it, and he's already done. So the next newsletter will make sure somehow the board got off the distribution list for that. So he'll make sure that the board is on the distribution list for that. The other three things that I would share is one, we probably should not have overconfidence in what's happening at slaughterhouses with their ability to match samples to an individual animal, so that if some test after that animal is long gone into the food chain, that if the test, and there'll be a delay in that, when the test comes back, it is obvious, and we've had this on numerous cases. We had it with the TB. That's why we had to test so many animals in the TB slaughter trace, is because they could not narrow it down to an animal. They could not narrow it down to a ranch of origin when it was that far down the supply chain. Some of the rules we've looked at, remember, even the rule for official ID starting in 2023 does not apply to animals that are being shipped for slaughter. And the other thing here is that we have to remember that while most of our producers vaccinate, do what they do that as a matter of course, not all of them do. And we're talking about an area that is receiving a lot of animals that are outside of our vaccination area, and they're certainly not in the DSA, and they're not receiving a lot of DSA animals. You don't hear about these things happening in Headwaters and Butte and other places. The animals coming there largely always are coming from an area that requires, or most of the time, coming from areas that require vaccination or are actually DSA source animals that we're dealing with. So yes, if it's a DSA source animal, it'll get tested. If it's outside of our vaccination area, if it doesn't have a bangs tag, that's not a problem because it's outside of our vaccination area. And then I'll come back, and sort of the third point I'll make here is where if we are not comfortable with the enforcement level that we have for lack of vaccination when it is required by rule, then that's something we have to look at. Because like I said, I will investigate that further, but I will be highly confident now in saying that I would bet we do not have legal authority to stop someone from selling their animal because they haven't complied with the vaccination requirement. We would be able to write them a misdemeanor ticket, and we do. But that might be something for the future to explore, is if you want to tie that vaccination requirement to you can't sell without vaccination, then I think we'll probably have to add, and I don't know if we can do that through rule. I would bet that that's a high enough order thing. We would have to do it through statute. And I guess last but not least, so once again, if I just want to be clear with what I hear, and so that we don't get on a slippery slope that gets ourselves in more controversy than we want. If we were to say that animals coming from areas that require vaccination, so let's say that's Carbon County or Stillwater County, Bighorn, and we say, well, we also want them to bleed those animals, then essentially you've made them a DSA county, not just a vaccination county. And so, so we just want to be careful with that. But I certainly think in listening to this conversation, if people think that we would hold animals for lack of vaccination, I think that'd be beyond our legal capacity, and we need to look into that. But the thing that's a bit outside our control, except for those that are inside Montana, and most of them are not, is that I think we have found that slaughterhouses, it is really hard I mean, we've been lucky that we're able to get the information we get, but I think a lot of people have confidence that when you send an animal off and it is sold into the slaughter chain, that if it tests positive for not just brucellosis, if it tests positive for TB, that somebody's going to be able to identify that animal to your ranch, or if it's not your ranch, the ranch of origin. We have found that that is not the way it works. And I would say in this particular case, you're lucky that they didn't have so many different lots of animals from so many different places that they said, well, this could have come from 8 different locations and would have tied up a lot more people. So anyway, that's where I just wanted to say that, to just say that, you know, I think I feel the intent of what's being said, and there's probably more work to do on that area. But I think this also deals with, a lot of us have perceptions that some of this stuff is a lot more airtight than in reality it actually is.
Thank
Okay.
you, Mark.
Yeah.
What else?
Mr. Chairman, this is Gilles. I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, sir.
Picking up on all of this conversation. Last summer, we, the Board of Livestock made a comment to a rulemaking on mandatory ID, electronic ID, essentially opposing it. And our grounds for opposing it is that they are putting a mandate on the producers without having created a system or a mandate at the other end. And this is a perfect example of that, you know, what is wrong in their proposal of mandatory ID. The issue of mandatory ID is not going to go away. I mean, perhaps it should be a project of the Board of Livestock, and particularly the Veterinary Department, to get input so that eventually we can have a system that is comprehensive and actually, you know, solves our issue. You know, because if at the other end, at the slaughter plants, they're not matching the carcass with the ID, I mean, this is all a waste of time. Just a comment there.
So, and Mr. Chair, if I may, and Mr. Stockton, so there's a variety of reasons why we sometimes don't get a match. And even when animals are ID'd, sometimes there's a mismatch between the lesions that's submitted and the tag that's actually provided. So I'll acknowledge that. So there's numerous holes in the system, and that's one of them. But when the animal does not have an official ID at all, then it just makes our job a lot harder as well.
Well, and this is Wendy, if I may say this really quick. To me, it's not so much the official ID. I mean, it would be fine. I agree with Gilles that it shows that this is definitely a chink in the system. This is the weak link. To me, it was more of a inspection paperwork issue, not matching up with back tags. So it's that inspection before it's leaving the sale yard or wherever, that they weren't linked up properly to begin with before they left to go to slaughter.
Any comments to that, Dr. Zalewski?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Palmer, I'm not, I guess I'll say that, yeah, perhaps Dr. Szymanski, because I'm not as familiar with what brand inspection paperwork follows that animal to the slaughter floor.
Mr. Chair, yeah, thank you. Mr. Chair, Mrs. Palmer, this is Tani Szymanski, Animal Health Bureau again. This was not a shipment that went directly from the livestock market to the slaughter plant. These were animals that were purchased out of livestock markets in Montana and went to a feedlot where they were on feed for a period of time, and then they were inspected out of a feedlot and went to slaughter. And so there was no back tag associated with this animal by the time it moved to slaughter either. So So there wasn't a mix up there, I guess, to clarify your point, Mrs. Palmer.
Okay. What else on this subject? Lila?
No, I'm fine, thank you. I'm sorry that it got kind of off on that, but I think it's a really important discussion, especially in our counties that are kind of sitting there and we don't know if we're sitting ducks or if we're, and you know, we really, I don't want this state to get all worked up, you know, with outside interest. Everybody knows that. But I also don't want something to go undetected that needs to be stopped in its tracks. Maybe that's the way to put it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. Dr. Greg Judah, are you on the line?
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I am on the line. For the record, my name is Greg Judah, Director of the Montana Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. I hope everyone is well. Today, I presented 2 items for discussion. The first item I wanted to present just a review of the year-over-year brucella testing numbers, as well as year-over-year Nuln disease testing numbers. And this is more of just general interest, I believe, no board vote required. But I know that several of the board members have expressed interest in brucella test numbers in the past, and rather than having Leslie Doley bail me out again, I figured I'd go ahead and get right into the lab information management system and pull the numbers myself. So this was as of January 7th. That top table there presents the brucella test numbers. And in all of 2019, and for your information, this is calendar year, by the way, since we had reached the end of the calendar year, figured it'd be more appropriate. For the calendar year of 2019, we had roughly 91,000 tests completed. And if you'll recall, that included the RAP test for screening as well as the FPA test for screening. We converted, I believe it was somewhere around October 20th of that year, kind of in mid-stride in the peak of the season. And then that compared to the test numbers for calendar year 2020, where we had a little over 113,000 tests. So that represents an approximate 25% increase year over year. We do believe that some of this may be attributed to increase in the area of the designated surveillance area, so more testing there. But also a potential negative impact on the 2019 tests due to the conversion of the screening tests and the resultant several herds being quarantined longer than we had anticipated, while USDA and state health officials figured out, animal disposition in some of those instances. So I'd be happy to answer any questions related to that. I believe it's pretty straightforward. It's probably good for the lab, but certainly kept us busy this year.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Any questions about that chart and the increase in testing on that?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
This is Mike, and I hate to be asking one of my staff this question, and I wish I should have thought about it when I looked at the chart, but it just popped into my head. And Greg, you may not have this answer at your fingertips, but I think another column on this chart would have been helpful, which would have been, and maybe you mentioned it in your narrative, would be to show 2018, because I think the concern that had been expressed by the board is, are we back recovered to the level of testing that we were pre the issues that arose with switching over to the FPA? We knew we had a drop in 19. It's good to see the numbers up. I guess if you saw 2018, you'd have a better idea of, are we back to the same level of surveillance, involuntary surveillance, I guess I would say, that we were in 2018.
It's a great point, Mike, and that's certainly something we can follow up with and pull those numbers fairly quickly, but I think it would be of interest to the broader audience here.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Nina.
Greg, I had to step out for a minute, so I just ask real quick. The abortus RAP test went to 0 this last year. Did it get wrapped into something else, or I mean, 30,000 tests is a lot of tests to disappear.
Yes, that's a great question. The actual RAP test, if you were to look at 18 again, as Mike pointed out, you probably would have seen about 80 to 90,000 tests in 2018 for the RAP test. And what happened was the RAP test was converted to the FPA test for screening as a result of the RAP was the preferred method for USDA prior to about mid-year 2019 or October of 2019. The USDA was furnishing the laboratories across the nation with the materials, the supplies, if you will, to perform the RAP test. And these were being made at a bioreactor in Des Moines, Iowa. And my understanding of the situation is that they lost the ability to manufacture the RAP antigen. And so with that, it necessitated a conversion to a new type of screening test. And looking at the available other tests at our disposal, the BAPA, the CARD, the CF, and the FPA was judged to be the most reliable and the quickest and the most high throughput. And that's why all that RAP screening testing was converted to FPA testing going forward.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on that chart? Okay, Greg, go on.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the next table illustrates our year-over-year Nuln disease testing summary. And as many of you are familiar, Nuln scope diseases include high consequence animal diseases as well as foreign animal diseases. And we are currently, I believe it's 8 or 9 that the Montana Veterinary Diagnostic Lab is authorized to perform and has trained technicians and has passed proficiency testing in accordance with USDA protocols. What I wanted to illustrate here primarily was, I know there's a lot of curiosity in the chronic wasting disease ELISA testing that we began performing on behalf of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks as of 2020. And you can see the vast increase, having performed almost 7,500 of those tests as of the beginning of January. That number has continued to creep up as we continue to receive some samples on the shoulder season of hunting, as well as extended hunting seasons in areas like the Ruby, where I believe FWP is desiring to thin out some of the animal population, especially in like the white-tailed deer. The other thing that I thought I would illustrate here is that the Nuln standing, in other words, level 1, level 2, level 3 designation that is given to laboratories by USDA is impacted by the number of tests that you perform on behalf of Nuln on a given year. And so going from an annual kind of test number of 290 total tests up to, you know, nearly 8,000 tests performed for Nuln scope diseases, that's a significant increase, and ultimately is trending in the right direction that we want to go, which would be ultimately to achieve level 1 Nuln status as a laboratory. Now, whether or not that's achievable without getting, you know, a construction of a new building and having, you know, other items that come with it, like BSL-3 biosecurity level, remains to be seen. But that said, certainly this is a move in the right direction. We are actively working here in the laboratory to train and cross-train more individuals, because the number of technicians that you have proficient in testing is also a factor that's taken into consideration, as well as the efforts that we're making to acquire more equipment that will increase our theoretical test throughput in the event of an animal disease outbreak. So I'm pretty proud of the staff here and what they've done, especially being able to bring on something like CWD testing, where, you know, we had to shift, you know, significant hours from full-time employees diverted towards that testing. Yet at the same time, we're able to maintain our normal state of operations. So I think we're in a good spot currently in terms of our staffing. I'm very comfortable, and I'm certainly proud of what they were able to accomplish this past year.
Thank you for the update, Greg. Any questions about the Nuln testing?
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina.
Yes, Nina.
Greg, one of the questions that we had last fall was, would the CWD testing have any effect on the brucellosis testing? And with the increase in the DSA size, did that have any effect? And how many tests did you do for the DSA that you were doing at the same time you were doing the CWD testing?
Great question. Ms. Baucus, Mr. Chairman, what we did here at the lab was essentially treated those two operational lab sections independently. And while we did have an increase in the number of brucella testing in the DSA, we were still able to absorb the CWD testing throughput that was necessary to facilitate the needs of FWP. One of the primary reasons for that, we were able to achieve some additional operational efficiencies within our serology group, primarily because of an additional plate reader being brought online. And then with an eye towards the future, we are also looking at the possibility of bringing in a liquid handling robot at a minimal investment, maybe with an eye towards next year. As far as the CWD, how we were able to accomplish that was through cross-training. So we had technicians from molecular diagnostics, from bacteriology or the microbiology group, even an individual from the milk lab was able to help out with sample preparation for CWD. And they really pulled together as a team and were able to still achieve that throughput without impacting other lab sections and the testing that they were required to do on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Greg? All right, Greg, please proceed.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. The next section here pertains to a topic that we touched on very briefly at the last Board of Livestock meeting. And there was a request that I had presented to the board to bring on 5 new diagnostic tests. And as a result of that, rightfully so, there was a request from the board for additional justification to bring those tests on, especially in terms of operational impact and assessment, and whether or not, I think one of the questions was, would we need additional testing personnel or lab personnel, but also the cost that would go into getting these tests up and off the ground, and then the benefits of these tests. So without reading this through, because it's pretty detailed in terms of the tests, I guess I'd open it up for questions at this time if anyone has any specific questions related to any of these 5 different diagnostic tests, and I'd be happy to answer those.
Who goes first? No questions about it?
This is Wendy. My question last time, I'm totally on board with bringing more tests on if it's felt that they're needed, which obviously the professionals, the veterinarians did feel that it was needed as a all state, all service, full service veterinary lab. My question was just how many have we sent out that we could be doing in state once we put these into the test offerings? How many have we sent out in the past was my question from before, and that's all.
Which is a great question, Ms. Palmer, Mr. Chairman. I believe the one that was easiest to illustrate, I'm trying to think off the top of my head here, but one of these we referred, I think it was 112 tests to different labs in the state. The primary benefit for most of these is turnaround time, especially these 2 SNAP tests, which would be the bovine diarrhea virus as well as the Giardia. For the SNAP test, we were looking at replacing approximately 200,000 in-house tests with this test going forward, which would reduce the amount of time that our staff are required to actually do the bench work for the diagnostics. It would improve turnaround time for our producers and veterinarians, and also reduce the cost to them. So that's just an example of while these tests wouldn't necessarily be referred out in all cases, we certainly would stand to benefit, and it would provide additional operational flexibility for our own staff if we were to bring this in-house for the minimal investment that's provided.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Nina.
Greg, the one thing I would say about this, we are in the process of going into the calving and lambing season. And I wonder if it would be a good idea to get the information out to our stakeholder organizations as well as all the vets that these tests are now available at our veterinary lab, because there's been a time when some of these tests were not available, or the timeline at our lab was pretty extended. And so it goes back to the discussion we've had this morning about PR and getting that information out to the folks who would use the lab, because as you said, more tests at the lab are very helpful as far as some of the novel stuff goes.
Ms. Baucus, Mr. Chairman, I believe that's a very valid point. And, you know, I should point out that the messaging to our client base, at least in terms of sending them a direct email to let them know that these additional tests will be available, is certainly pretty straightforward now, that we have the ability to email directly from our LIMS system to our entire suite of clients. I believe it's about 650 different clients. It's proven to be pretty effective in the past, such as when the regulations changed around EIA testing submissions. The unfortunate part is the rate limiting path here is getting that amended rule into effect. And so that's why I'd like to get this in front of you guys for a vote of approval. And once done so, we can get this into the hands of our administrative staff and Helena, and get these amended rules out for public comment, and then hopefully enact these sometime here in the coming, weeks to months.
Keel, you're on mute still.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you very much for doing this, Dr. Judah. This really answers my questions. I can see that this is going to be a good thing for the department and the industry. Just one kind of small question. The SNAP test, the BVD SNAP test, what are the false positives or negatives as compared to the other tests that it'll be replacing?
Mr. Stockton, Mr. Chairman, that is a really good question, and one that probably exceeds my level of expertise. I would need to defer to Dr. Erica Schwartz-Collins in terms of the specificity of that test. I would expect that it is a similar, type of specificity in terms of false negative, false positive. But certainly, if there is a disparity, I think that would be worth us mentioning to producers, whether it be in a mass communication as well as our user guide, and talking about guidance in terms of which of these tests we recommend. But I think that's a legitimate question, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
All right. Well, thank you. Mr. Chairman,
yes.
I'll make a motion that we authorize the addition of these 4 tests.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there a second?
I second it. This is Lila.
Lila? So we got a first, second on the floor to proceed with the amended rules request. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Same sign.
Brett, Nina's out of the room right now, so maybe when she comes back, she could give you her vote. Would that be all right?
Yeah, she can let Mike know what her vote is. Motion passes though, so. Okay, Greg, is that all for you today?
Mr. Chairman, that's all I have, and I appreciate your attention and helpful input. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've done the legal counsel update. Mike, I think we adjourn for lunch now.
I would offer, if you wanted to, I think John Stiber is on, if you wanted to.
Oh, is he?
Let him get on with his day. That's up to you, though.
Okay, John, let's get yours done with. You're on mute.
And he may have it on and he may not be in his office. So if he's not, we can take lunch and come back. But I just saw his name out there, so I just thought we'd offer him a chance to go ahead and get done if he wanted to.
Yeah. Well, he must be out of the office evidently, or can't get his mute button changed. You there, John? Okay, well, let's just break for lunch. What time do you want to come back, you guys? It's 12:15 now.
I don't care.
What's Lila want?
I don't care. I just want to eat my sandwich. And then go home tonight. Thank you.
You want to just say 1 o'clock? It's 45 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, 1 o'clock sharp. Thank you.
You're live now, sir.
Okay, Dan, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No offense to anybody else, but I'm gonna miss seeing Dan's bald head, that's for sure. I'm not sure about anything else but that.
I don't have my camera on, so I don't glare everybody out.
All right. Finished lunch. Let's move on to the next report. Centralized Services Division reports. Brian, are you on the call?
Well, the next thing is under Central Services, but it's John Stiber for Predator Control.
Okay. Sorry about that. I got to jump back between these two agendas. Sorry. Get my stuff straight. John Stiber, are you with us?
I'm here. Can y'all hear me?
You betcha.
All right. Good to see y'all, everybody. My name's John Stiber. I'm with USDA Wildlife Services to give the Wildlife Services report. I don't have a lot to report today, but I did want to talk about a retirement. Mike Hogan, who has worked for USDA Wildlife Services for over 41 years, retired at the end of December. He was out of Valier, and so he covered Pend Oreille, Toole, and Liberty counties, and he retired at the end of the year. So we have selected a new person for that position. His name is Kirk Sims. He's going to be up there. He comes from a farm over by Malta, so he's kind of a local guy. He worked for us this summer as a grizzly bear specialist for 6 months or so this summer, and then we hired him to take over for Mike Hogan starting yesterday, actually. So he's brand new. He'll be getting quite a bit of training here the next week or two, but he's already in place. We also hired a new fixed wing pilot, Scott Snyder, out of Turner. Some of you might know Scott. He's done a lot of flying around the state and so on, different projects. He's been a contract pilot, fixed wing pilot for us for a number of years, and now he's come to work for us as an airplane pilot. He'll be flying our USDA Super Cub. So he started yesterday as well. So now we just need some good weather. If we can get rid of this wind for a little while, it would help. But we're also getting ready to hire some summer help. As you know, we did receive some funding from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to help with the grizzly bear work. So we'll be hiring several people to help with that again. That's where the new employee I talked about earlier, he was in one of those positions last year. So we'll have some new people that we'll be hiring there, at least one on the Rocky Mountain front and one down in the Gravelly range. And then we've got some other positions that we'll be hiring as well. One up on the Blackfeet Reservation, one over in the Kootenai National Forest, and another one down in Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is that our predator environmental assessment, predator damage management, predator assessment is out for public comment. It went out this past Friday, and it's open for 30 some days. So it closes public comment period closes on February 19th, which is also a Friday. So I encourage anybody that would like to read a 500-page document to read through that document and comment about predator damage management. It is specific to Montana, and it kind of assesses some of the work, our work that we've done in Montana on predator species, primarily protect livestock. So that's all I've got, but I am available for questions. If y'all have any questions, I'll try to get you back on schedule a little bit better.
Thank you, John. Any questions for Mr. Stiber?
Yeah, I have one question. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Okay. Could you guys forward that that wildlife statement or report, or at least send us a link to it?
I should be able to do that. Who do you want? I'll have to talk to my NEPA person, but who do I send it to,
Well,
or the link?
Well, Mr. Chair, or Jill, this is Mr. Stockton. This is Mike. I did include that link in my report on Monday. So John, we're catching a little bit behind the curve. We discussed that this morning and the potential for the Board of Livestock to make comments on that EA. So that's why we're asking. But you could probably just send it to me and disperse it. I don't know. I also don't want to get you in trouble, John. I don't know what your rules are about as a federal employee. Yeah, and Nina or Lila's pointing out to me that in our report on Monday, I did include a link to the USDA website for that.
Perfect. That would be easiest for me, Mike. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina. John, is there anything specific if the department, if the Board of Livestock were going to put a comment in, other than the things we know? Is there anything else specific that you can tell us about, or that has to comment on?
Not really. There's some pretty specific alternatives and so on to look at. Of course, it's completely up to the board or the department, you know, which alternative they believe is the best alternative. But it goes through all predators, everything from ravens to, you know, grizzly bears and wolves and coyotes and fox and wolves, black bears, mountain lions. It includes all predators that we have in the state and all the work that we do in the state as well. And then it has a number of different alternatives from no work to different types of alternatives. So,
Mr. Chair, again, this is Mike, and I just want to make sure that, and especially for any public who are listening, that Mr. Stiber does not try to be evasive of our questions on that, but he is not permitted to advocate a position with us. So I just want to be clear, that's, if people thought that was a non-answer, there's a reason it was a non-answer. So it's up to us to evaluate the EA and make whatever decision as a public body we need to make about it. Is that fair, John? I just want to get you off the hook there.
yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't like hanging on hooks. So yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. That's very, very true. We don't advocate for either way. We put it out there for comment and then allow the public or organizations or whatever to comment on it and send those comments in. And then we address the comments during, you know, after the comment period is closed. We get all the comments and we start addressing comments. And sometimes that takes, that's a lengthy process, as you can imagine, just in and of itself, to address all the comments.
Anything else for John? Okay, John, thank you. We'll move on
for any board member. All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Move on to the Brands Enforcement Division. Ethan, are you on the call?
And Mr. Chair. All right. Good afternoon, board, Mr. Chair. I have for you really a re-record update and really the status of how re-record's been going so far. Obviously, everyone knows that re-record started January 1st. We sent out over 55,000 packets. Of those, we've received, and I'm giving you rough numbers, we have not counted every single one Obviously, our estimate is about 14,000 applications have come back with payment. We're still going through all of those and processing all those payments and getting those certificates out to brand owners. But with our limited staff here in Helena, it's and the heavy workload, it's taking quite a while, but we're working quickly to get through all those. As far as online re-record goes, as of yesterday, we've had roughly 1,800 brands re-recorded online. A little bit lower than we were hoping for, and I can get into some of my reasoning for why I think that occurred. But I'm not gonna say I'm disappointed, but I was expecting more brands to be re-recorded online. So overall, close to 30% of the brands have been re-recorded or have been sent in with applications and payment. As far as some of the issues that we're seeing, the biggest issue that we've seen is we've gotten roughly 15,000 envelopes back that were not deliverable. So that is a lot of outreach that our staff has to do over the next couple months. We have to do research, make some phone calls. Some of those could be people that are temporarily away, but we're going to have to put a lot of legwork into each one of those, and it's going to take all of the staff's effort here to get some accurate addresses. As I said before, the processing time is kind of slow and diligent. It's a diligent process as far as making the deposits and everything with accounting, and actually processing all of those in the database, and getting those certificates out to brand owners as fast as we can. One issue I think the board is probably familiar with that we've heard about also from some brand owners is I would say some confusion over the letters themselves. Mainly the brand image on the letter without a specific species or position on those letters. I think it's probably a little more confusing to folks that might have the same brand on different locations on animals. So what I want to say is that we did look into that while we were doing our planning, maybe a little bit later than we should have because we didn't really have a ton of time to react. So there are a couple issues with it. One, there is an issue with the database merging over to our letter. Some of these certificates had multiple species, and I think we had one with up to 5 species on it, and there was a lot of margin for error if we're going to migrate all that information over to the letter. And it was kind of we had to make a decision: is that a risk we wanted to take, or do we just go with the image? And we made the decision to go with just going with the image. We have gotten a lot of calls about it. We are doing the research for the brands, helping folks, I guess, identify the exact brand that that certificate or that letter applies to. And also what brand owners can do is if they have their brand certificate, that brand ID number on the letters will line up with the brand ID number on their existing certificate and gives them all the specifics that way. That was the biggest point of feedback that we've heard so far. Another issue that came up mostly in the beginning, and I think Ms. Palmer, this was kind of the issue with one of your brands, was when we did the data pull from Axiom over to a large file that we can do the mail merge with. The primary contact information on a lot of those brands, which isn't always the same as the owner, filled into the brand owner section on the letter. In some cases, that can be kind of an issue and lead to some confusion. Say the brand is supposed to have a husband and a wife, and it just shows the husband because they're the primary contact on that brand. So that is an issue that has come up and led to some confusion. Again, we've answered a few questions on that and confirmed with some folks. And when I go back and think about it, I don't know if there was really a way to catch that was happening. Because if you're looking through a database, you're just going to see names in those slots, and we're probably not going to be able to catch it because it's going to look how it's supposed to, just with a name as an owner in that section. Getting into some lessons learned, we're keeping track of a lot of these lessons that we're learning. The big one is we probably should have waited a little bit longer to send out these packets, a little closer to January 1st or even after January 1st. We would still be in compliance with code if we were to do that. And the reason I say that is when I mentioned the online re-record earlier, the rate being lower, I think a lot of there's some confusion on the dates. I think people were getting their notices in the mail and assuming that the December 31st date, which was December 31st, 2021, was December 31st, 2020, and they rushed to send their packets in. And the other issue is when folks are getting these in the mail, that link was not able to be activated until January 1st to re-record online. And that was done intentionally because we're not legally able to process any of that until January 1st, 2021. So because they were not able to access that link, they just went ahead and sent in their packet with their check. It also would have been very helpful to do a mass address update in the months leading up to re-record with some public notices on that. And more of a point for management. I would love to be able to track the number of phone calls we're getting to our re-record line and our main line, just to really track the data and see if maybe another temporary position is going to be necessary in the next 10 years. So those are really the highlights, Mr. Chair, and obviously open to any questions.
All right, Ethan, I appreciate that. You touched on the two things that I was going to mention. When I got my paperwork, I went online to look at it because there was some brands that, there was one brand I was confused with, and then I couldn't get anything done on the website either at that time. So that's why I ended up emailing you. So thank you. Any other questions? Any questions or comments for Ethan?
Mr. Chairman, this is Lila.
Yes.
I got a few of those questions, but my source was right at home and he was relentless. Why the heck did you send it out before Christmas? And, you know, there's so much mail at that time of the year. I said, well, I think it might have been by law. And why isn't there any locations on it? But my question is, since I've been one of us that has beat on this pulpit about people paying per capita fees, I did not look at this until the other day, just before I came. So I printed off one. We only have two brands. One of our brands, and it says, "Do you own livestock? Yes or no?" Then in smaller letters, you're required to pay a per capita fee, which to me should have been in big bright letters. So now when we get this back and says, yes, they own livestock, are we going to take, and I don't know how we do this, are we going to take those yeses and send them that little nasty green card or a letter or something that says, you know, now's the time to put your name and put your animal, what your ownership of stuff in? Because I think, in all fairness to everybody in this state, everybody should get to pay per capita fees, which will have it not be required to raise per capita fees for everybody else. So my question was, had I written this, I'd have had it in big red letters, but since that's not my job, mine is only to give free advice, I guess, for what it's worth. Are we going to somehow relate yes to sending those people up per capita fee?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Taylor, this is Mike. I'll take, yes, our intent with asking that question is to try and get some demarcation, if you will, in the brands database to say, okay, these people have said they own yes. The step missing in what you pointed out is we will want to do a comparison the best we can to who is paying, the same way we did with the project we did last year on inspection, horse inspection data and CBIs and all of that data we have. Because we do, although you're going to miss it, we figured that out with the horse thing with the number of people, is that you're going to have a number of those people who are going to say, yeah, I pay per capita, but I pay it in this name and my brand was in this name. So you'll get some of that. And so we want to try to avoid people getting 3 or 4 letters from us harping on paying per capita when they've already paid per capita. That can be a bit off-putting. So we'll try to avoid that. But yes, I think that's our intent, is that, okay, if you've marked that you own livestock and you're not in our per capita database, then you should be paying per capita. And if we do a comparison and you're missing from the per capita database, then you should get a letter saying, you know, you've marked, you have a brand, you've marked that you own livestock, but we can't find evidence you're paying per capita. Here's a reporting form. And so we do want to do those things in the future. That's why that question was asked.
I'm depending on you new members to keep after this because I think it's really important that everybody pay their fair share in this state per capita.
Any other comments or questions for Ethan?
I have one other one,
Here.
not brands. Is that okay? Brad, is that
Go for it, Lila.
I have not looked online. How many positions do we have now that are being advertised to be filled?
Chair, Ms. Taylor, I didn't catch that. I'm sorry.
How many positions at this time, and what are they, are being advertised to be filled for the brands division?
Ms. Taylor, Mr. Chair, we don't currently have any unfilled positions. Well, let me back up. We have an opening in the market in Glendive. However, that is not being advertised at the moment because we, in order to be budget conscious, we're going to wait a little while to fill that position.
Okay.
Because of a payout.
Right, I knew that. Yeah, I knew we had payouts. I didn't know if that had been advertised yet or if we had any other ones or not. Thank you, Ethan.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I want to say the tone of Mr. Wilfor's presentation today was kind of negative. So I'm giving him some feedback here. The thing that he failed to really enunciate, I think, are the positives, which are we're 20 days into the period. We believe about 30% of the brands are back. Yes, there's a lot of mail to sort through. It'll take some time. So I say for the benefit of the public, you know, if your stuff is not getting returned to you right away, just imagine you got 14,000 pieces of mail to go through and get the deposits made and do that and turn that around. You know, I think there are a lot of things done very well. The other thing is that we have, yes, those 15,000 pieces of return mail are a problem, but it's January 20th. And we now have a year to sort of do more outreach and nail those people down and try to get to as many of those people as we possibly can. Which is a good thing to already know that and have that, and then sort of have some plans. And Ethan, you know, I've written in my reports that Ethan has a pretty good plan with his team about how they're going to work through that and try to get this information out over the course of the year. So there are a lot of positives there that I want to highlight that I think, regardless of some of the feedback, we're off to a good start. This is something we only get to do once every 10 years. The other thing that Ethan didn't mention is he is keeping a good running log of these types of issues. Now, the question will be is if in 10 years none of us are here, will anyone pull it off the shelf and look at it? I hope they do, to make it even better in 2031 when this comes around again. But like I said, Ethan was very hard on himself there, and I just want to point out that a lot of positives have come from the start of this process. It's a big process. We only do it once every 10 years. We're dealing with thousands of people, and to have this much done 20 days into the year deserves some commendation, even if there are a few things that we can learn from. So I just want to make sure I mentioned that and said that about the process publicly.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Nina.
This Nina. Ethan, you still are doing radio and Northern Ag Network and those broadcasts, aren't you?
Yes, Ms. Bacchus, Mr. Chair. I did an interview with KMON, as suggested by the chair. We are going to go into radio. I was going to wait till at least after the first quarter of the calendar year. So after March to book anything, mostly because I kind of want to see where we are as in terms of re-record percentage that have been brands that have been re-recorded before I made any decisions on the advertising.
Well, I would suggest that if you're doing that, that you have Taylor Brown or whoever it is, repeat and repeat to people that if you have not received your packet, it's probably because the department does not have your current mailing address. Get your address to the department so they can get your packet to you.
And Brett, I have one other, and I know we're 15,000 is a lot of things returned, but on our electric co-op, obviously people die, and unless the estate's settled, they don't know who to give a capital credit check to. And sometimes and I don't think we'd have to publish it in the paper, but we might be able to, if it's legal to do, publish it, a list online so that if somebody knows, some people have a lot of time to look around at things or enjoy doing that. And sometimes they can look at a list and say, oh, I know who to contact. And in our co-op, we get a long way doing that because obviously people say, oh, I bet he'd like his money for starters. So that's just a suggestion. I don't know if we can publish those names. I mean, make a list of those names when we get less than 15,000. But I think it helps because people look at stuff and say, oh, I know who got that, or I know who to ask for that. Because I don't want to get to next January at this time and have all of you having to have problems. It's not, that's not what it should be.
But your counties make lists of who haven't picked, or the state make lists of people who haven't picked up their tax return money. They do that all the time.
So
Okay, thank you. Jill, you had something more?
Yes, I just would ask a question though about all of those letters that came back. For years, the only address I had was a post office box. And now, just in the last 4 or 5 years, they've added a route number, street number to me, which I assume did all over the state. But it causes a lot of confusion when I go online to order something because, do they send it to the post office box? Do they send it to the route number? Is that part of the problem that you might be facing there with those returned envelopes?
Chair, Mr. Stockton, I would assume that's probably part of it. It is winter, so we have a lot of folks that are temporarily away as well. They're wintering elsewhere. There are probably a lot of different reasons, but yeah, we just have a large stack of undeliverable mail sitting in the brand office right now that we're gonna need to do some research on and figure out.
Anything else for Ethan? Hopefully you've got another 20,000 by next month's meeting, Ethan. So good luck.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if it's proper, this is Gene Curry. I was just going to ask what the protocol is for someone that's delinquent in filing. I know I was at a board meeting here a few years, well, last filing, 10 years ago now, I guess. And there were some appeals that came in from the public that had missed the deadline. And those appeals were granted on a large part. And I'm just wondering what is, I haven't kept up since then. What's the protocol going to be of the department this year?
So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Curry, I'll answer that since Ethan's new. There's not a grace period. I think at one time in the past, the department, they offered a grace period after January or after December 31st when it closes. December 31st, 2021, say you'd have 3 months if you missed it. Some auditors found that was not legal, and so therefore there is not a grace period. We did institute that we would do a freeze on if a brand is given up, we're not going to immediately, if somebody wants to jump on that on January 2nd, we're not going to issue that brand right away, because there's always could be some legitimate things where someone mailed us something and we missed it. You know, any department mistakes we can correct, but somebody who just missed it, you know, that unfortunately there's not a grace period there. And I don't know if the board granted those appeals at that time. Maybe that's what led to the audit finding that you shouldn't do that, because the law says December 31st, and it doesn't say December 31st plus 60 days. It says December 31st is the issue. So, so yes, I guess that would answer your question on the grace period. And I think we'll deal with appeals. We'll deal with those things. I think there was actually Brett and others who were on the board at that time can probably help, that there was actually litigation. And part of why some of that was done is there was actually some successful litigation that was made. And so we're trying to do the process in a way to where there won't be successful litigation on the back end, that we will be able to prove we did everything we were supposed to do. So I would say that the big message to get across there is there's not a grace period. There's not really an ability for, unless the department made a mistake. If the department made a mistake, then we can correct that. But if you just missed it, you know, there's not going to be anything that we can do for you, which is why it's incredibly important to keep hammering that this is done. So any of those 15,000 people, what we hope is they'll hear it on the radio and say, I didn't get a packet. I better call the Department of Livestock. The other thing we've talked about doing at some point, and as Ms. Taylor put it very well, we need a number lower than 15,000 before we do that. But do we eventually take this out to even down to our local inspectors and say, okay, in your county, here's a list of 40 people we haven't heard from. Do you know these people? Are they still around? You know, do you know where they're at now? Like, just trying to get any information we can to get to them. Because the other thing we haven't talked about, we talked about the PO box issue, or the 911 address issue, which I think is part of the issue. Ethan addressed the snowbird issue, which I think is part of the issue. The other issue is that sometime in the last 10 years, the owner of that brand has passed away, and none of their descendants, especially if they're not running livestock or using the brand anymore, don't even know anything about it. And so it went to that person, but that person's deceased. They've been deceased for a long time. So the post office just sent it back to the Department of Livestock. And so how do you get the word to their descendants that there's a piece of property out here in your significant other's estate that never got dealt with, and if you want to keep that property, you need to get it re-recorded and the estate part of it settled so that you don't lose that property. So it's a long answer to your question, Mr. Curry, but that's why it's so important that we get everybody in by December 31st, because our options for helping people after that point are very, very limited, unless it was clearly a department error that led to it.
Thank you, Mike. Gene, if you have some more questions on that, if that's not clear, we'll tackle that on the comments at the end here. Any other questions from the board for Ethan? All right. I don't see any reason why we should recess unless you guys need a couple seconds. I would think if you do, you can jump out. I think we'll continue on to the Centralized Services Division reports of the Fiscal Bureau. Brian, are you on the call?
Mr. Chair, I am on the call.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Brian Simonson, Deputy Executive Officer for the Department of Livestock. A couple announcements, reminders, did the same thing last month, but before I get going down the reports, two, one for per capita fee, as most livestock producers know, those cards have gone out. They've seen notices in the paper about per capita fee. I've watched that for the last couple of weeks. Deadline for those reporters to report their livestock is March 1st. The other, and just for FYI, I did look on the Department of Revenue's webpage yesterday, and 1,700 reports have been filed already. So they must know something we don't about their livestock on February 1st, because they're they can see into the future. That's awesome. Okay, sorry. Aerial hunting is the other one. The deadline for that is January 31st for our pilots out there to get their renewals in and get their aerial hunting permits for 2021. With that, we'll move on to tab 5, page 1, the multicolored page, Department of Livestock State Special Revenue Comparison for fiscal year 2021. I'll just drive down the page, calling out things that I think are noteworthy for this month. We'll start in the blue section, the brand section on row 6. What we have there is the field inspections. We've had another strong month of field inspections. You can see in column C, year to date, we've had $170,000 in revenue. Nearly 40,000 of that revenue came in the month of December. So strong showing for field inspections. Likewise, the next row down, market inspections. We've had $335,000 worth of inspections in the month of December for a total of almost $869,000. So we're up in the market 45,000 over this period last year. So doing well in our brands area. Per capita fee, row 13, another solid month. Even.
You have a question?
Hey, Brian, the only thing, I don't really have a question, but I think for Alan and Jean, that they need to know that, and maybe they can come up with a better term, because I don't even like the one we've got. That field inspections are inspections done by our district brand inspectors.
By state employees.
Right, by state paid employees, okay? And we've tried to come up with a way of doing, I'm not sure Field calls it right or not, but that's what that is. And I didn't realize years ago they used to do a lot of the inspections, especially out of feedlots. So anyway, just for those two guys to know what that is. Sorry to interrupt you, but.
And that,
Brian, please continue.
Yes, sir. I assume we'll get some board orientation and get through all the acronyms also. This will all just come as a fire hose for a little bit. I'm on per capita fee row 13. Just to note, we've taken in another 25,000. We'll be reporting, in the next couple of months what the, 2021 per capita fee revenue coming in is, but right now, that's pretty small, so we're still looking at last year's payers is what that, basically that $325,000 is there. That's people who didn't get paid by June 30th of 2020. Okay, milk inspection and egg grading, I really don't have much to say. Those are coming in as we expect. We did have some timing issues last month or the last few months, but those have all caught up. So what's happening there is, what we budgetarily expect to be happening in those two sectors. The last section is the diagnostic lab fees. Another super strong month. I'm on row 28. You can see there for the 2020 fiscal year, we've taken in $719,000 in column C. In December, that was amounted to $182,000. So, and that's 82,000 more than what we budgeted or expected. So lab fee revenue is coming in good, probably going to come in strong again next month, but it'll be tailing off as CWD and Brucella testing, has come to a close. So for the most part. Any questions on state special revenue?
Mr. Chairman, this is Nina.
Yes, Nina.
Brian, down on line 39, where you're talking about the fees coming in one month when they're actually charged another, does that cause any problems with our audits?
No, I mean, we're going to recognize revenue as it comes in. It's just that what Evan is trying to really point out there is that expenses are a month ahead. So when we look at the budget, so they've got to do the billing cycle for that and then send out the bills and then receive the revenue in. So it's delayed lab fee revenue is delayed versus all the other revenue by a month in that. But we're recognizing it when we receive it, and that's what auditors are concerned about.
So, Mr. Chair, this is Mike, and just to help with folks out there, that's accounting for the fact that, no pun intended, accounting for the fact that many people who would look at our reports, are probably used to accrual accounting, where when you build that, you would go ahead and recognize it. But as Brian said, we have to recognize the revenue as we receive it. So we don't recognize it until it comes in the door, even though we've already billed it. If we were doing accrual accounting, we would recognize the revenue at the time we bill it, whether it had actually the check had come back or not.
If there's no other questions, I'm going to move on to page 2.
Please.
Page 2 is our projected expenses. So what we're looking at here for the public is our actual expenses to date, and then what we've projected based on history and conversations with the departments, what we're projecting for the rest of the year. And then the far left or far right column, column F, is what we're projecting over or under our budgeted authority. So for the most part, we're relatively unchanged for the month of December over the last few months. We have had some larger expenditures in overtime and some other operating expenditures I'll go into. But for the most part, that is, fall run, CWD testing, brucella. I mean, that's the time of the season that we're in. And so they're not having a big effect on the actual projections. They're mostly having a big effect on column B, what our actuals are. So they're mostly expected and coming in as expected. As I said before, on the personnel, just trying to work down the column there, we have had a considerable amount of overtime in the brands department as a result of fall run, very much anticipated, but that is driving the projections down a little bit from what we had expected. So not a concern, but just a significant event for the month of December. And that's about all that's really happening in personnel. In operations, some significant expenditures include in row 7, we're looking at contracts. That first, in column B, I'll just give you the numbers that kind of occurred for the month. That's accumulation over the fiscal year. But for the month of December, we had about $207,000 increase to that. It is what makes up part of that big increase there. Primarily, DSA testing is working its way through, so a lot of testing is what's in that contract. There's other things, but that's the big mover for the month of December. The next column down, next row down, row 8, is supplies. That jumped to $182,000 in December, largely or almost exclusively in the labs testing supplies area. Again, we'll see the expenditure this month, and we'll see some more revenue next month. But they're still showing purchasing of supplies for increased testing. The other columns that are, or other rows, I'm sorry, that are significant are communications in 9, rent in 11, and other expenses is row 14. They're not as much as the other ones, but they're mostly attributable to closing out the year for the calendar year of December. The accounting tries to get in more expenditures for the calendar year. And so I think for the most part, what we're seeing is a lag from last year. And so as in like rent and other expenses, there's like double the expenses that's in that month than what we had seen previous. So those numbers are kind of big. All right. Overall then, total projections, if we're in the bottom right corner of that report, we can see total budgeted funds or projections of $424,000. That's actually a decrease of, I'm sorry, I lost my spot, of $36,000 for the month. And that's the first decrease in projections that we've seen for this fiscal year. So when our projections are mature, as they are come January, December, we'll start to see, things close. So we'll get some negatives and then we'll get some positives and we'll float around that number. But really quite healthy. And I'd stand for questions on that page.
Any questions?
This is Mina.
Yep.
When we're looking at the funds, Brian, we are short almost 106,000. And is that authority for general funds?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Nina, thank you for the question. Yeah, we've been that way for a few months now. I'm going to attribute that, there's some interplay between DSA, the lab, and meat and poultry inspection, but for the most part, I'm going to attribute that negative to the meat and poultry inspection. If we were to look over on their side, we'd see that they're over that number for operating expenses and personnel expenses for the year. So I've called that out the last couple months as a concern for us that we're monitoring. I think we have some carry forward that'll help there. We're asking the feds for more federal money in meat and poultry inspection. And then, we've got some program for options available to us as we get closer to the end of the year. So it's a known quantity. It's mainly attributable to meat and poultry inspection, and we're watching it.
Okay, so, and please correct me if I'm wrong here. We can shift authority back and forth if it's the same kind of funding, if I understand that correctly. So if we have authority, extra authority for general funds in one area, we can shift that extra authority over to another area to help bolster their general fund authority. Is that correct?
That is a tool in our toolbox.
All right. We have only $9,000 of extra authority in DSA. And that's all the extra authority we have. So how are we going to make up this particular extra authority? And if we actually in meats we're 114,000 short, does that mean we're also 114,000 possible short with federal funding that we might get to help?
Yeah, Ms. Bacchus, Mr. Chair, again, great, good questions. So DSA, I would say you're correct. We are projecting that we'll only have $9,000 left in general fund. I'm a little bit more skeptical that there will be more money there than 9,000. That is if we're performing as we hope to perform in the DSA. I still think we're lagging behind that quite a bit. If you look at contracts in the DSA right now, and that's page 7, and you'd be on row 6, you'd see that there's $692,000 left between now and June 30th to spend in the DSA contract in the testing area. We're going to spend a huge chunk of that, but I don't know if we're going to spend $700,000 between now and then. The other thing I would say is that we have another tool in our toolbox, which is going to allow us to maybe in places like the lab where we have general fund, that we have other resources to spend there, like the lab revenue that we're seeing accumulate. That maybe what we do is we spend down expenses in the general fund there with lab revenue if we get in extremis. Now we have, a lab to build, and so we got ideas for that lab revenue. So we got competing priorities going on there, but we do have other tools in our toolbox. And again, I'll mention, I think we've got about $40,000 in general fund carry forward that's not in this mix currently. I hope that answers your question.
That still leaves us quite a bit short.
We are short, and we are asking the federal government for an augment in there, but it's kind of a confusing time right now, and I wouldn't go banking on them filling a need there at this moment. So I'm a little skeptical on that side.
Well, then my next question, if we're short in authority on general funds, can we use any other, can we go in with per capita to make sure that meat and poultry has what they need?
So I'll step in, Mr. Chair, on that. So one of the things that I think is probably just to start at the highest level and break down of what Brian is saying. So Brian said 04 funds earlier, and I know that some of the board members may not be tracking with that. So what he means is 04 is the animal health program. So that's where all of our DSA is in that program. So we can move DSA we can move general fund from DSA to meat or from meat to DSA. We can move general fund from the lab to meat. And so one of the things that Brian was saying that I think is the reason why you don't see concern on us is that we believe, and Brian, tell me if I'm wrong, one thing that's hard to put a number on right now because we've not realized it yet is we believe that this lab revenue is going to continue to come in strong. So you'll see that we budgeted just shy of 1.2 million of lab fees to come in. Well, if at the end of the day, we actually have 1.4 million of lab fees, we actually have the ability to use more. If that were the case, and let's just give a scenario, we'd be able to use 200,000 more of our user fees in the lab, which would free up $200,000 of general fund that we could then move. So that's why you don't, I mean, it's hard for Brian to give exact numbers because that's what we expect to happen and that's what we're monitoring. But as Brian said, you know, if we were to stay on projection DSA, and you pointed that out correctly, there's 9,000. If we have $40,000 to carry forward, you can take that negative number of 105 and subtract 49 from it, and you would get to 56,000. The reason we feel comfortable is we think with the lab and other things, we're going to have 56,000 to be able to do that, to be able to make that zero when we close the budget year. And then, of course, as Brian said, the other tool in the toolbox, we got it last year. We don't know if we'll get it this year, but we do have the ability to tell the federal government or ask the federal government for additional funds from FSIS. And we did get that last year. This year, we'll see what happens and what's going on at the federal level. I'm just going to say I'm maybe more optimistic than Brian with the amount of money that is being dispersed right now with relationship to meat and poultry inspection from the federal government. I would hope that that would be a priority for the federal government to help these state inspection programs that might have had a tough year. So I think there's a lot of things that are in a positive track for us. It's just hard for us to put a number on it right now because and I will say this is the way I think Brian's the same way I am. We're tracking towards a really good year in the lab, but until we hit that 1.1 or 1.2 million number and our lab fees start going above that, I don't want to count on it till I see it, but I do believe it's going to happen. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the last thing I would say on that, if there's no other questions, is just that, you know, we are meeting with Marty, Meat and Poultry Inspection in the lab every month. We look at all of these together under Marty's purview. And, you know, if we had concerns that we were going to run out of money or the ability to pay, we'd be bringing that to you in a House Bill 3 recommendation or something. But I mean, there's plenty of tools in our toolbox, and the future is bright relative to the lab. I just reiterate that again. So, but it would be very hard to justify asking for some kind of increase right now. Looking at what's, you know, still in our, you know, within our grasp.
And I would also say, and add to what Brian said, that the other thing is that this is normally how this looks through the December financials. So this is how it's looked every December I've been here. We've been looking at that problem. So, and then we've been able to manage and adjust and fix to it. So I guess that also, hopefully that doesn't make us overconfident, but it makes us confident that, yeah, we've stared at this problem every December, at least for the last 4 or 5 years, and and we've always been able to manage our way through it, and we feel like we can do that again.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask Brian a question, please?
Yes, Lila.
So are you gonna do it, you're not gonna go any further in meats, are you? Or where are you going next? Because I don't want to jump the gun.
I was just going to jump to page 12 and cover a few bullet points on the comparison reports.
I just wanted to ask you then on meats, what is causing us the increased costs? And I think it'd be worth all of us knowing. I mean, have we had new plants come on we've had to inspect? Or is this just for the same plants? And why are we getting, I mean, I know you say it's December, but I'm looking, it's January and we're 114,000. And in 2 months, we might be 100. I guess I'm trying to figure out why you're not concerned about it. Maybe that's what you're
Yeah, so I know you asked that question of Brian, but if I may take the first stab of it. I think the biggest contributing factor we have, and I hate to even mention this in a public meeting, we've mentioned it before, but I think it's worth noting, is that this is the only area of the department where we do have collective bargaining. And so we work with MFP. They represent our meat and poultry inspectors. And unfortunately, the cycle of negotiation of that collective bargaining agreement is mid-biennium. So we're like halfway through. So we get halfway through a biennium, and then we go to collective bargaining. And if we have to give them a raise, and every time we've done collective bargaining, we have, because that's how it works. And I don't want to get into all the national labor standards here of what happens if you don't fairly negotiate. But what that does, and I shouldn't say that, I'm not saying that as a negative. What I'm saying is that puts us in a position that there are things we have to commit to in collective bargaining, but then we don't snapshot those for another year and a half. They don't get snapshotted into the starting point motion, if you will, for our legislative budget. So we just got those snapshotted, and then we negotiate again, right? And then we have that, and it has thrown us off cycle. I do wish we could get that bargaining agreement to where it would close it to a 6-month gap versus a year and a half gap if we would do a short cycle negotiation. But you're sort of locked into whenever that group ratifies their labor agreement, you're sort of locked into a 2-year schedule after that. And that just always creates a bit of a pain for us, because those especially on the personnel, which is the big number, you have those expenses that you have to agree to, but they're not snapshotted into your legislative budget. And so that just kind of always throws us off cycle. That's why I say we see this every December, is because that's just what the nature of the cycle of this drives for us. And then we have to work and manage around it the best way we can. Now with meat and poultry inspection, the other thing that makes it difficult is some of the tools in the toolbox Brian talked about, you may not always have available to you. If a meat inspector leaves, and they're the only one covering 3 or 4 counties, and you've got people in there that need slaughter days, sometimes we don't have the option to leave that position vacant for 6 months to catch up. But we do, as Brian pointed out, we do have many other tools to try and work through and manage that. But that collective bargaining agreement is the biggest driver of what causes us to always sort of look a little bit off in this at this time of year.
All right, thanks, Brian. I didn't realize it was off a year. It was that much off cycle, because obviously we just.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That's all I needed.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I just wanted to add one more thing, and we can just look at, if we're on page 10 and we're looking at the meat and poultry inspection, I just want to talk about the personnel side. So I think this helps answer the question as to, will it be, 200,000 next month? What you're looking at there in column F is a number that's $81,000 in the hole. Okay, that number hasn't moved off of there for several months. I mean, we know and what we're projecting. So between you add column B and column C together, we're tracking that and following it, and we have been for a while. So this 114,000 isn't changing exponentially from month to month. It's staying pretty stable right now.
However, as we get closer to the end of the year, we need to be, we're hoping that we're going to close that gap, because as Brian pointed out, it's a projection of where we think we'll be at year end. So it doesn't have a cumulative effect, but we are going to have to bring that number to zero by June 30th. We know that. We have to figure out a way to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, if we're going to go to page 12, the Department of Livestock Budgetary Expense Comparison Report. This report basically just looks at this time last year and compares the two. One of the things it also does, though, at the bottom of the page is Evan's comments there are a good broad stroke for us to look at as far as how much of the budget year has elapsed and how much we've expended. So you can read there that expenses are outpacing last year by nearly $416,000, but we are on track with the overall budget being we're 45% expended as of the end of December, with 47% of the payroll and 42% of the operating budget year elapsed. So we're right. I mean, you kind of got to put those two numbers together, with payroll being 2/3 of our budget, being the bigger number, the more weighted number. But we're right on track as far as we may be spending more money than we did last year, but we've got fuller employment and other activities going on that are better than they were this time last year. But we are well within our budget, so that should be a confidence booster. Personnel costs, comparative overages is there. You can see on column E, row 5, we are $322,000 over the period, same period last year. That's contributable to more personnel and more fuller employment and some pay increases, predominantly in brands, in the lab, and meat and poultry inspection. All those things are as expected. Operational notes, row 8, column E, contracts, we are down $72,000 from last year, due again to Brucella testing, DSA testing coming through. Still a known quantity. And DSA testing, as you can see from Dr. Judah's reports, is coming in pretty strong compared to this time last year. Supplies, the next row, we're coming in $86,000, another $86,000 we spent out of the lab compared to last year. So doing much more work in the lab than we did this time last year, as evidenced by the budget numbers. And lastly, other expenses, E19, we're up $89,000 there due to indirect expense charges. So this time last year, we were behind a month on charging out indirects, in this month, and we're up to date this year. So there's a disparity there, but accounted for. So that's my budget report. The fluctuations, are they do occur in here, but they are all relatively budgeted, and we're really sitting on a pretty good footing for December 31st. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Any other questions for Brian? Not going to let him off the hook that easy, are we?
We'll let you ask all those.
All right, Brian. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, I'll just make a comment and say when we have new board members here in a couple months and he has to explain all this to them for the first time, that's when he's going to get all his hard questions.
It'll be a piece of cake, Brian. All right, so that takes care of our fiscal bureau. We're getting about done with this meeting, it looks like. We'll have some comments from the public on non-agenda items, or if we didn't get your question answered earlier, Gene, in a proper fashion, now's your opportunity to jump in.
There we are. Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for maybe asking a question out of turn there. I just want to try and garner as much institutional knowledge as I can from this board, because as you know, there's going to be at least 2 new board members coming on here in the near future and possibly more, I don't know. And so any institutional knowledge that I can garner, I appreciate it. And I appreciate your efforts, Brett. I know you've been on there a long time. I think I was at one of the very first meetings that you attended as a new board member, and I appreciate the way you run the meeting. I think you do a very good job. So you're a good media monitor for me to follow. So thank you for that. And I will probably be reaching out to you on some of the things. The one thing that I was going to ask you, I tried to take notes when you were giving your report on the executive evaluation and your future goals. And you talked fast enough and I write slow enough or whatever that I was not able to get down enough detail of what your goals are for the department. So I'd appreciate it if you have it written, that you could maybe send me that, email it to me,
I'd
so that
be happy to.
we have a basis to continue from.
Be happy to do it, Gene. Thank you.
So, and that's, like I say, I apologize if I was out of turn. Just wanted to try and keep my mind as focused as I can on what's happening and what needs to happen. So appreciate your efforts, everybody.
You bet. Thank you, Gene. Any other comments from the public? Give everybody a chance to unmute if they want to talk. Couple more seconds. How about producer organizations? Any comments from producer organizations? Everybody's taking it pretty easy today.
Well, and I'll look out there real quick to see who we have on. I know Mr. Redfield, the other new board members out there, but he's on mute right now. We have trying to see who else we might have still left from outside the board. And it actually looks like we don't have a whole lot of public still left on. So we must have successfully bored them to tears. Or the fact that it's getting close to 3 o'clock, all the lobbyists had to run to the Capitol.
All right. Well, to the public that stuck it out till the end, thank you very much. And now it's time to set the date for the next board meeting. I assume we should have one more here in February before the new board takes over. Looking at a calendar here, I'm pretty sure I'll be weighing bulls off test around the 22nd and 3rd. Mike would like around the 19th. Be too quick between meetings, or what do you think?
No, I mean, just as long as we have an understanding that, I don't know if we'll have January. We'll be rushing to get January financials, but I think the big thing that drives that is the decision we made earlier today is if the committee comes back with any potential comments on the EA, that has to be done before February 19th or on February 19th so that we can get the comments submitted in a timely fashion. So it certainly, I think February 19th or before is probably good to handle that item, as long as we have a little bit of understanding that financials may not be, for January, may not be complete at that date.
And I don't know that we'd have to have a huge in-depth meeting, as much as, in the legislature, a lot can happen in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So we may want to have something happen in there.
So, Mr. Chair, that's the other reason why I think it's probably good to do. I mean, because we don't know what issues may pop up by that point in February. I mean, I would expect that we would have executive action on our budget. It would be moving over out of the subcommittee and starting to move to the appropriations committees. And there could be things that we're needing to talk about, trying to get back in the budget or things of that nature. So yeah, it's probably good to plan for a meeting, because there's a lot that could happen that we would need board input on in the next couple of weeks.
Any comments from the board for in last couple weeks of February, what they have in mind?
Mr. Chairman, this is Lila. The 18th is fine with me. The 17th really pushes me because I have a meeting the day before. And so I have to drive up at night, and I'm not sure my driver, I think he should be home cabin heifers by then. Today he's with me, but by then I think I can come by myself. But the 17th really pushes me if it's on that day.
I'm good with the 18th.
Okay. Wendy? Seems like there's a certain day of the week that works better for Wendy. Is she still on the call?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, usually Wednesdays are my best day, but I can, if I have enough notice, which I do, I can adjust to the 18th.
Okay. Ed, any comments? How about Jill? Any comments from Jill about that? Looks like February 18th is the day. I'm sorry, what? Who do we have talking, Mike?
I'm trying to find out. Oh, Sue,
Oh, Sue.
we're hearing the background noise of the jungle of Costa Rica. That's what we're hearing.
No, you're not. The 18th is fine for me. I think Jill said it was good for him too. That's what I heard, I think.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so let's set this up for February 18th, Mike, okay?
All right, we'll do it.
Okay, anything else that we need to discuss before we say sign off?
Thanks, Brett.
You bet. Thank you, everybody. Sue, you need to get to the beach and do a little surfing.
Bye, have fun, Sue. Wish I was there with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Thank you for a good meeting. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Good afternoon.
Bye.